right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GBNews family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GBNews.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick, Christys, it's GB News, and today is an explosive show. Let me tell you that much, because it's Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, and yes, that's right, it's war. Accusations and allegations flying back and forth non-stop, but the latest line is this: Boris Johnson might be banned from Parliament for the rest of his life. I'll be having a very, very close look at all of this. In other news as well, Rishi Sunak basically been caught out lying. Do you remember that big stopping the boats is working thing that he did last week? And we said, actually, Rishi, it's the weather. Well, it turns out it was the weather, because yesterday we had a record number of people making that journey across the channel. Nigel Farage joins me on that for his views on both of those two stories, by the way. In other news, we're also going to be talking a lot about this with Lee Anderson, who's in the Home Affairs Select Committee. Why? Well, finally, people have got their heads together and said Albanians don't need to claim asylum because Albania is a safe country. It's only taken us a couple of years, but finally we are there. And just to round us off, I told you this was going to be a great hour, didn't I? We've got Nicola Sturgeon as well. What to do with a problem like Nicola, OK? Humza Yousaf has said he is not going to suspend her, but can you imagine if the old Westminster press had spent as much time focusing on what was going on, allegedly, in Scotland and less time on Boris Johnson and some cake? Well, the world might be a very different place. Patrick Christys on GB News. GB Views at gbnews.com. Get those emails coming in thick and fast, but now it's your headlines.
Hello, good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Tamsin Roberts with the latest. Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said his predecessor asked him to overrule the House of Lords Appointments Commission in approving key allies on his resignation honours list. The former Prime Minister is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs failing to appear on the list despite being nominated. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names were absent. Rishi Sunak says it wasn't right and that he didn't feel comfortable making promises to people.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
Meanwhile, Downing Street has defended the investigation into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties. It's after Boris Johnson attacked the Privileges Committee, describing it as a kangaroo court before announcing his resignation as an MP. The inquiry is thought to have ruled the former Prime Minister lied to Parliament when he said COVID rules were followed. The final report will be published later. Rishi Sunak's spokesperson expressed confidence in the committee, saying it's doing exactly what it's been asked to do. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday, the highest number on a single day so far this year. It means the yearly total number of people making the crossing has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics, where he left behind a career marred with sex scandals and corruption allegations. The 86-year-old had been suffering from leukemia and had recently developed a lung infection. His body has now left the San Raffaele hospital. Number 10 says Berlusconi made a huge impact on Italian politics over several decades, and our thoughts are with the Italian people and his family. It's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge and insists she is innocent of any wrongdoing. GB News political reporter Catherine Forster has more.
Nicola Sturgeon's arrest yesterday is part of a 2-year police investigation Operation Branch Form into a missing £600,000 of donations given to fund a Scottish independence referendum that has never happened. Now, her husband, former Chief Executive Peter Morrell, was arrested in April at their home. Then the Treasurer, Colin Beattie, also arrested. And now former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, all questioned by police, all released without charge.
3 British people who were on a diving boat that caught fire in the Red Sea off Egypt have died. The Brits were originally declared missing when their scuba diving boat went up in flames off the resort town of Marsa Alam yesterday, but it's now confirmed all 3 died in the incident. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. An 11-year-old British girl has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured. A neighbour is said to have shot at Solane Thornton and her family outside their house in Brittany. The town's mayor says the neighbours have had hostile exchanges in the past. The mother was also injured in the attack, and her 8-year-old daughter Celeste managed to escape to get help. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. The Foreign Office says it's supporting the family. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon John Rainey is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and is due in court. King Charles chugged into Pickering on the Flying Scotsman, celebrating the 100-year-old engine. The King rode the famous steam train through the countryside on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, celebrating its 50th anniversary. When they pulled into the market town, the crew and driver gave the King the royal treatment, inviting him to stand in the footplace and see how the train works. Charles was greeted by hundreds of well-wishers on the platform at its final destination. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's over to Patrick.
Explosive show today, and it starts with war breaking out between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. The former Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister going at it. Johnson has accused Sunak of talking rubbish over claims that he asked him to overrule the House of Lords Appointments Commission. And it comes after the current Prime Minister said that Johnson had asked him to take action that wasn't right. So Sunak says Johnson wanted him to do something he wasn't prepared to do after 8 of the former Prime Minister's nominations for peerages were rejected. One of Johnson's allies says Sunak secretly blocked honours for the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries and others. Johnson announced on Friday that he was quitting as MP, leaving Sunak facing an awkward by-election in his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. But since then, there has been a big war of words, and conspiracy theories abound, people. Conspiracy theories abound, OK, that Nadine Dorries has stood aside so Boris can have her seat. All of this to go over. But I'm joined now by GB News' political editor, Darren McCaffrey, and this has led a load of questions, such as, is Boris Johnson going to just leave the Conservative Party outright? Could he stand for election for another party? And is Rishi Sunak doing the right thing by supposedly, anyway, going to war with Boris Johnson? Darren.
Yeah, really fascinating. As you say, we have got the current leader of the Conservative Party and the former one in a war of words this afternoon. Now, there are kind of two actual issues at play here, Patrick, if you like. First of all, it is about his honours list, if you like, the people that he wanted either to receive knighthoods or OBEs, also people who may well move to the House of Lords. Now, clearly, he didn't get all the people he wanted into that upper house, the one behind me, the one with the red leather chairs. And in doing so, he seems to have taken his anger out of the Prime Minister. Now, Rishi Sunak today is saying, hold on a second here, that's not my job. My job is to allow this process to go through with our President. It is not up to the current Prime Minister to interfere in all of this. Rishi Sunak suggested that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson asked him effectively to interfere, though this afternoon Boris Johnson says that that is all rubbish. He has spoken to the Times newspaper in which he said that Rishi Sunak is talking rubbish. To honour these peerages, it was not necessary to overrule the essentially House of Lords' committee, but simply to ask them to renew their vetting, which was a mere formality. So as I say, you've got Rishi Sunak saying, hold on a second here, I wasn't prepared to do what Boris Johnson wanted me to do. I wasn't prepared to make promises to people that I wasn't going to keep. And if you didn't like it, tough. That's what he said, tough. And then this afternoon, Boris Johnson claiming he's talking rubbish. Then there is this second track, if you like, Patrick, of a story, which is around the Privileges Committee investigation into Boris Johnson, whether he misled Parliament. Clearly, because he decided to chuck in the towel, Boris Johnson has concluded that committee is going to conclude that he did lie to Parliament. He could face anywhere between 10 to 20 days suspension, which could lead to a by-election if he was to stay. We're expecting that committee to meet this afternoon to sign off the formal report. We'll probably get sight of it tomorrow, but it is quite incredible that a former leader, Boris Johnson, is dominating the headlines yet again, dominating the Conservative Party, and let's be frank about this, again, slightly tearing it apart.
Much Darren McCaffrey there, GB News' political editor. I'm asking you a whole host of questions today, everybody at home, or if you're watching on your online or listening on your radio, etc. GBviews at gbnews.com. Overall, are you Team Rishi or Team Boris? It does appear that the former Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister very much are at war, a war of words at the very, very least. But do you think that Boris Johnson should just throw the towel in with the Conservative Party completely? Should he go and join a different party? Later on, I'm going to be talking to Nigel Farage, who, of course, has got some links there with the Reform Party. So I'm going to be talking about whether or not he thinks Boris Johnson should go and join that party. But I'm joined now by Rebecca Jane, who is the Deputy Leader of UKIP. And Rebecca, thank you very, very much for this. Would you have Boris Johnson in UKIP?
Personally, I only speak for myself. I don't speak for our board and I don't speak for our leader. But for myself, absolutely not, no. Why on earth people seem to think that Boris is a saviour when he's the person that got us in this complete and utter farce to begin with, I'll never understand.
OK, go on. Just elaborate on that then. So there is a lot of sympathy out there for Boris Johnson at the moment, with a lot of people saying that they think he was ousted by a kangaroo court, and in fact that some people saying that's actually quite offensive to kangaroos. But you appear to think that maybe he deserves everything he gets.
I do think he deserves everything he gets. You know, the Conservative Party is a mess. Rishi's a snake. Boris is a bumbling idiot. Like, it is what it is. He's the person who got us into this state that the country is currently in, and Rishi was by his side. So him pretending like he's the saviour is ridiculous too. Boris was the person who signed us up to net zero, for goodness sakes. He let us down on immigration, and he absolutely bumbling Boris created the worst Brexit actually possible. So, no, I don't think that Boris in the slightest is anybody that should be championing how good he is for this country when he completely and utterly destroyed it with Rishi by his side.
Boris definitely doesn't get a lot of flack for doing a lot of very unconservative things. I mean, the big net zero agenda is one that I think, you know, really, if people had had a much closer look at that, I think they would have said that it's not very Boris. The flip side to it, though, Rebecca, and this is something that scientists all around the world will be doing their best to try to figure out, which is that Boris Johnson can actually, in a weird way, be very honest with you about the kind of person he is, you know, has some previous indiscretions, shall we say, probably likes the odd glass of red wine, has maybe at times been slightly economical with the truth, but everyone goes, you know what, I want some more of this guy. And there's no kind of logical reason for it, but a lot of people, a lot of voters do. You mentioned there that you thought Rishi Sunak was a snake. Why do you say that?
Of course, he was Judas. He absolutely had a complete and utter plan to throw Boris under the bus and get rid of him, and he executed it well. He got what he wanted. But no, absolutely, you know, Boris, there was a point there that you made, and I've actually just lost it as to why I wanted to pick it back up with you again. But no, you think that he is, like, honest and all the rest of it. He's not. He's playing a character. He's not this, you know, guy around the corner and the guy that you'd meet on the street. He's not. He's playing you at a game, and he's well and truly brought a lot of people into this plan. You need to look past it. Look at the state of the country. The proof is in the pudding. Don't look at this, oh, I'm one of you, and I've made some mistakes.
To be honest, Rebecca, I you know, fully respect your view, of course I do, but you know, I do also look at the result of the last general election that we had, and it was absolutely stonking. And I think a lot of Red Wall MPs, a lot of people up north, I know that's your part of the world, so you obviously disagree, but a lot of people up north think, yeah, I would continue to vote for Boris again, and I just wonder whether or not he should be setting out on his own now, forging his own path, and deciding to join another political party and try and get some seats. But you're saying that you don't think that there's any room for him in UKIP.
Oh, goodness gracious me. You know what? I'm telling you now, Patrick, I've had it on a very good and reliable source that Boris has taken a very significant amount of money, and what he's going to use that money for, in my personal opinion, is that he's potentially going to start his own party. Do I think he's going to join one of us? No, I don't. I think that Reform will probably piggyback off the back of it and say, oh, he may do. No, he won't. But you know what? They can have him because he has created the worst Brexit that we know, and we actually want to get Brexit done because we were the party that actually started it, and actually what people voted for is what we said all along.
Do you think that there is something there, Rebecca, that's a little bit rum about the way that we can do politics in this country, where somebody can win a stonking majority at a general election, and then, you know, a few people on a committee can basically say, we're going to oust this guy, and then that's it. That's what happens. That's the kind of world that we live in. I mean, there does appear to now be, this is the new line that I'm going to talk shortly anyway to Christopher Hope, who is, of course, from The Telegraph. I mean, he's got his finger bang on the pulse when it comes to this stuff. But there is serious talk about, because Boris Johnson is saying that he doesn't respect the result of this kangaroo court, as he's calling it, that could lead to him essentially being in contempt of Parliament and being ousted from Parliament forever. I mean, we are veering into the realms of the kind of way that dictators handle the people who've just gone before them, isn't there? Which is to just brush them off and try and airbrush them from history. I mean, if this was happening in China, we'd probably be all right with it, wouldn't we?
Listen, the one thing that I have said all along, and it's the lesson that I learnt the first when I joined, obviously, UKIP as their deputy in September, October last year. Politics is corrupt. Wholeheartedly, it is corrupt. It's about people playing a game, and you've got to figure out what that game is and what the best move to make is. You've got a whole lot of people who are selfish, looking after themselves and whatever is the best game to be now playing and whatever their best move is. Rishi played a move. He won. Now Boris is playing another one, and what his next one's going to be, I think you should all sit back and get ready.
All right, look, thank you very, very much. Always an absolute pleasure, I must say. Great to have you right at the start of the show. What a way to lead us in. That is Rebecca Jane there, who's the Deputy Leader of UKIP. So initially I wanted to ask, bear in mind, I've got Nigel Farage on later. He's going to be talking to me about whether Boris Johnson should be joining Reform or starting a new party. So we'll get his take on all of that. a lot of rumour, a lot of speculation as to whether or not there's going to be some kind of collusion there. You will get it straight from Nigel very, very shortly. Also, as well, Nigel's been in the channel today exposing another myth. It's another one of our top topics, which is that the boats have been stopped, or they are indeed being stopped. Well, they're not. We said at the time, and we were one of the few, if the only real media outlet to do it, we said, well, actually, have you just checked the way that the wind is blowing in the channel at the moment? Have you actually just seen that maybe that is the reality as to why there are so few boats coming across, why they were down about 20%, etc.? And the second that weather changed, what happened yesterday? We had a record day for the year, more than 600 people coming over in a single day. It's the highest for the year. And mark my words, we are staring down the barrel of another record year in the channel. More on these stories, though, on our website. Get this now at gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national website in the country, and it's because it is stacked full of up-to-the-second gold and dynamite on what is a dynamite news day today. It's got the best analysis, best opinion, and all of the latest breaking news. Now, last week, Rishi Sunak claimed his plan to tackle the small boats crisis was working. Well, yesterday, more than 600 people crossed the channel in dinghies. Was Sunak talking rubbish about this as well? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Radio.
Well, in just a few moments' time, it's going to be all about the Scottish circus that is Nicola Sturgeon, as calls for her to resign from the SNP grow. Will Humza Yousaf grow a pair and make her step aside? And wouldn't you just know it, a cross-party committee of MPs says that Albania is a safe country and migrants shouldn't routinely be granted asylum. I mean, seriously, you could have just looked at that by doing a cursory search of where you can go on holiday and then going to Albania and realising that it's a safe country. But alas, we decided to let loads of them in. Anyway, last week, Rishi Sunak claimed that the government's plans to tackle the small boats crisis was working. Yesterday, a massive 616 migrants crossed the Channel. That is the highest daily figure this year. And more asylum seekers have arrived in Dover today. The number of people who have come over from France in small boats this year has now passed 8,500. In total, in 2022, there was more than 45,000. And Nigel Farage thinks that this figure could well be beaten.
Long-term forecast, I mean, you know, they're unreliable, but the long-term forecast is it's going to be a long, dry summer without much wind. 45,000 could easily be beaten. And, you know, we may have promised another 500 million to the French. And it's easy to blame the French, but actually, these boats are now taking off from a 70-mile stretch of coast. They've got hundreds of square miles of sand dunes in which to hide. All too easy to blame the French. I mean, we've been doing it for 1,000 years, I suppose. But actually, unless we start deporting people, unless we say, if you come illegally via this route, you won't be able to stay, they will keep coming.
Well, this news channel, Nigel Farage, myself and indeed Mark White, at the time of Rishi Sunak's big announcement that stopping the boats was working and that the French had stopped 50% of the boats that had come across this year or tried to come across this year, we said the same thing straight off the bat, which is it was really the weather, I think, wasn't it? And it turns out that it actually was. And today, Nigel has been putting out other videos as well from the channel showing other boats coming across and, as he says, being escorted to British waters by French boats, which completely undermines Rishi Sunak's statement, bold as brass, coming out and saying, look at what we're doing, we are stopping the boats. It would seriously appear that they're not. And Mark White joins me now, our home and security editor. Mark, thank you very much. Back on dry land, I believe. There he is, good stuff. But it is, I mean, it is seriously, it's just like it's like Piccadilly Circus in the channel at the moment, isn't it? It doesn't look to me as though the boats have stopped.
No, indeed, just finding my land legs again after a few hours out in the middle of the channel. It was pretty calm in terms of the winds that were blowing, just down to a couple of knots, really. But there was still a bit of a swell out there, and it was foggy. But despite that, about 6:30 this morning, out of the fog, we saw the first Border Force vessel picking up its first dinghy of the day. 9 dinghies in total we've counted so far that have attempted to come across to the UK, to UK waters, and been intercepted by Border Force, picked up and of course then taken here to Dover. It was about, I would say, no more than about half an hour after that first vessel that the second Border Force vessel had intercepted not one but 2 dinghies, and you could see actually the migrants on the vessel itself right up in the bow, all wearing the orange life jackets, and at the back of the vessel, the stern of the vessel, again dozens of migrants on that boat. In fact, over the weekend, Patrick, we had close to 800 people who crossed in small boats. If you add about another 450 or so today, I mean, that takes it well over 1,200 in the space of just a few days. And what is the reason that they're coming in this few days, this 3-day period? Well, it's purely because of that break in the weather conditions. The fact that the winds, which have been so prevailingly from the north for many weeks and months now, had turned back to a sort of southerly direction and had died down a bit. Tomorrow, they're back from a northerly, northeasterly direction again, which will make passage across the channel for these small dinghies much more difficult. So expect that number trying to cross to be very diminished, if not none at all, for the next few days at least. So the government, yes, is right when they say that the boat numbers are down 20% on this period last year. But I think they're wrong to suggest this is government policy. This is all about the weather.
No, and it's exactly the point that I was about to ask you just then, Mark, which is that, is there any sign that this has got anything to do with a deterrent? Is there any sign that this has got anything to do with the fear of the consequences of getting here and finding yourself in a migrant hotel? Or is the word Rwanda even mentioned when it comes to these people? Are we seeing fewer human trafficking gangs? And if the answer to all of those things is no, then it has to be the weather, and that is one thing that Rishi Sunak cannot control. Are we getting value for money from the French, though, Mark? You know, I know that we blame the French quite a bit for everything. They have got a long area of coastline there, but we are giving them around 500 million quid, and Rishi Sunak was saying they'd stopped half of the crossing. So, I mean, is that true?
Well, I think it certainly is true that the French have stepped up their activities. What's happened, though, Patrick, is that a lot of the French policing now is around those beaches where traditionally over the last year or two, many boats have set off from, around Gravelines, around Dunkirk, and further south towards Calais. But what's happened, because the police are there in greater numbers now, they're actually going up and trying to get boats before they get them in the water and puncturing these boats. Well, the people traffickers, who have grown in sophistication over the years, are just changing their tactics yet again, and they're pushing off for much further down the coast, further down towards Boulogne. It's a longer journey, it's potentially more treacherous, but it then allows them, at least for the time being, to be able to push off into the sea unhindered by too many police and security personnel from France. I mean, the thing I will say for the UK government that is correct is that there has been a very significant tailing off of the number of Albanians who've come across. It's gone from 13,000 last year to so far this year just 28. Now, the thing to add to that is that normally the Albanians will be coming later in the year when the summer is underway properly. But even if the number is down, we don't know what the underlying factor of that is. Is it tougher government policy? Is it actually due to the fact that 13,000 came last year and all those that want to come have pretty much come already? What the government have said with regard to all of these policies is they acknowledge there is no silver bullet, but they hope that all of the policies, a tougher stance on Albania, more money to French authorities, the Rwanda policy, if it ever gets off the ground, that all of these combined will have the desired effect. But in claiming that now, Patrick, I think is a tad premature. I honestly think that it's due to the weather that we've seen a reduction on the same period last year.
Mark, thank you very much. Mark White, our Home and Security editor, who is in Dover for us. He was out on the channel earlier. He's back on dry land now, but he'll be keeping us up to date because pretty much this time last week, Rishi Sunak stood up and said stopping the boats was working. We can prove now that it isn't. We can also prove, can't we, that we've been such a soft touch for far too long. It has taken a good couple of years for us to work out that Albania is a safe country that no one really needs to seek asylum from. But that has only just been announced, by which time tens of thousands of people from Albania have come here, many of whom are now clogging up, of course, our hotel system, our asylum application system, or indeed just disappearing off into the ether. And it's on the Albania issue that I'm going to talk to Lee Anderson on very, very shortly. But we heard from Nigel Farage a short time ago. He will join me in the studio a little later. He's going to give his take on the Channel migrant crisis, but also that other big story for us today, which is the latest news on Boris Johnson. A lot of rumours doing the rounds at the moment that what might happen is that Boris and Nigel team up. Is that going to be true? You will find out live here on this show very, very shortly. Do not miss it. And we'll have more on the migrant crisis as well before 4 o'clock because of that Albanian issue that I was talking to you about. More than 12,000 Albanians have crossed the channel on small boats in the last year or two. But now a landmark report says that they are fleeing a safe country. Finally, a bit of common sense. And there's the latest on that turmoil engulfing the SNP as the party leader faces calls to suspend Nicola Sturgeon. Can you imagine if we'd have had as much scrutiny on Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP as we had on Boris Johnson and some cake? Remarkable, wouldn't it be? Anyway, latest headlines now with Tamsin.
Patrick, thank you. Here are the headlines at 3:32. Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said his predecessor asked him to overrule the vetting committee for his House of Lords nominations. The former Prime Minister is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on his resignation honours list despite being nominated. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names were absent. Meanwhile, Downing Street has defended the investigation into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties. It's after Mr Johnson attacked the Privileges Committee, describing it as a kangaroo court, before announcing his resignation as an MP. The inquiry is thought to have ruled the former Prime Minister lied to Parliament when he said COVID rules were followed. The final report will be published later. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday, the highest number on a single day so far this year. It means the yearly total of people making the crossing has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. It's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge pending further investigation and insists she is innocent of any wrongdoing. An 11-year-old British girl has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured. A neighbour is said to have shot at Selene Thornton and her family outside their house in Brittany. Their mother was less seriously injured in the attack and her 8-year-old daughter Celeste managed to escape to get help. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2524 and €1.164. The price of gold is £1,558.97 per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,569 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, now to the latest on the crisis at the SNP. And leader Humza Yousaf says that he won't suspend Nicola Sturgeon after she was arrested yesterday. Sturgeon was questioned for around 7 hours before she was released pending further investigation. She says she is innocent of any wrongdoing. But it's a remarkable story and one that I think we can all see has got a lot more left to run. Let's cross now to Edinburgh and speak to our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, thank you very much. Great to have you on. So what is the very latest? A remarkable day. I was sat down having my dinner yesterday and all of a sudden my phone starts going off and I thought it was a joke. And no, Nicola Sturgeon got lifted. What happened?
Quite incredible, isn't it? Former leaders, both north and south of the border, are causing huge headaches for their successors. Rishi Sunak having a bit of a nightmare with Boris Johnson and Humza Yousaf with Nicola Sturgeon. But he is noticeably much more supportive of Nicola Sturgeon than Rishi Sunak is of Boris Johnson. So the latest is that he has finally, after nearly 24 hours of saying nothing, come out and said in Inverness, where he was on a routine visit to NHS Highland, that he would not be suspending the former First Minister from the SNP. He did say it was personally painful to him that she had been arrested. Not surprising because, of course, he was her chosen candidate. He owes her, effectively, the fact that he is now in charge. It was very clear that he was the continuity candidate. She allegedly tipped him off that she was resigning the day before she actually did. But he has said I'll not suspend Nicola's membership. I'll treat her in the same way as I've treated, for example, Colin Beattie, who was the SNP treasurer, who was also arrested, questioned and released without charge, along with, of course, Nicola Sturgeon's husband and former chief executive, Peter Murrell. So that's it. I think there will be a lot of criticism of Humza Yousaf for weakness in not dealing with this. A lot of people saying that Nicola Sturgeon, when she was in First Minister, would suspend people on not a huge amount of evidence. And certainly this is a pretty big deal. You know, she was arrested as a suspect in a criminal investigation. Of course, she insists that she's done nothing wrong. She says that she feels without doubt that she will be proved innocent. And of course, there is a presumption of innocence in law. But still, after 2 years, this missing 600,000 that was earmarked for a second independence referendum, we still don't know where this money has gone.
Until we do, this kind of thing is going to rumble on. Catherine, thank you very, very much. Catherine Forster there, GB News' political reporter. I am joined now by Michael Simmons, who's the data editor for The Spectator. Michael, thank you very much. 7 hours to be questioned, 7 hours to be questioned. The house has been searched, the tent has been put up in the front garden. I mean, seriously, why on earth has Humza Yousaf not got the bottle to suspend someone who is undergoing this? If this had been Boris Johnson or if this had been anybody else, the SNP would have been howling from the rafters. You've got to suspend them. This is the worst thing ever. I mean, look, just in terms of the optics, this is much worse than anything Boris Johnson's ever done, no?
Yeah, this is, you know, whatever you can say about Boris Johnson, he's never been arrested as part of a financial investigation. And I think the fact that Humza Yousaf has chosen not to suspend her just shows really how weak a position he is. And that, you know, when I spoke to you during the campaign, we kept referring to how Humza Yousaf was seen as the continuity candidate. And I think this really solidifies it, that he feels he does not have the strength within the party to take that action against the former First Minister. He says that, you know, all the other people have been treated similarly, so that's why he's doing it. But there's plenty of precedent for this in the past. Nicola Sturgeon herself encouraged the suspension of Michelle Thompson a few years ago when she was being invested for things that she was later found innocent of. So there's precedent there. And the fact that Humza Yousaf is not acting on that shows that he really is in control of the previous regime.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not talking about a small amount of money here. I'm going to, again, reiterate that Nicola Sturgeon is adamant that she has not done any wrongdoing whatsoever and that, you know, as things currently stand, clearly nothing has been proved. She is just so adamant that she's done nothing wrong, and I want to make that clear. Where is that money?
So there's no kind of suggestion at the moment, and from what the police are investigating, that it's like the money has actually disappeared as such. It's more that the idea is that the money was crowdfunded. It came from donations for the specific purpose of a referendum campaign. Now, obviously, there hasn't been a referendum campaign, and that's where it's come, you know, where has the money gone? Now, the SNP have previously said that money has been spent as part of operations of running the party, and obviously they say that running the party is in itself a campaign for independence. So no one's saying that, you know, the money's actually disappeared. It's just that the allegation is that it's been misappropriated for what it was intended for. But as you say, this is, of course, just allegations at this stage.
No, and the real winners, I suspect, actually out of this will be the Labour Party. I would expect the Labour Party to do rather well up in Scotland now. One would obviously expect the SNP to do less well, and clearly I don't think there's a huge amount of love in large parts of the Scottish Highlands anyway for the Conservative Party. So potentially Labour and the Liberal Democrats doing quite well there. But look, Michael, thank you very, very much. As ever, always an absolute pleasure. Make sure you check Michael out as well on Twitter and online. He's got his finger on the pulse when it comes to all things politics. He's the data editor at The Spectator. Now, there's no basis for Albanian migrants to seek asylum in the UK. I'm going to read that one more time. This isn't just my opinion anymore. No, this is official. There's no basis for Albanian migrants to seek asylum in the UK. That is according to a committee of MPs. They are fleeing, quotes, a safe country. Is this not the prime example now of exactly why we should have got our backside in gear quicker, because we've already let so many of them in. But this has just come out from a committee of MPs. I am going to be talking in just a matter of moments to someone who sits on that committee. It's Lee Anderson, Conservative MP for Ashfield, and actually I'm going to be playing you a little clip as a little reminder as well of when Lee got stuck into the Albanian ambassador around a year ago, and it really is an eye-opener. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News. Don't move, this is Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. Now, in about 15 minutes' time, I will have the very latest on this huge row that's broken out between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson. I will have an update for you on that in about 15 minutes. But before that, to a landmark report that blows away claims that Albanians arriving in the UK on small boats should be given asylum. A cross-party committee has found that Albania is a safe country, and there is little evidence that Albanians are at risk there. The number of Albanians crossing the UK this year has thankfully plummeted, but in the 12 months up to last September, more than 12,000 Albanians arrived on small boats. The report found that nearly 46,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats last year, and the Albanians who crossed the Channel, of course, were a large part of that. More than a quarter of those, 12,000, were Albanian, though other reports have estimated that that figure may be as high as 15,000. 10,000 of those who came from Albania last year were single adult men. So, yeah, The women and children, they can stay at home, they can stay in the war zone, but the single adult men, they've got to flee. It means that the number of Albanians coming to the UK on small boats has increased from 800 in 2021 to more than 12,000 last year. In conclusion, the report says that Albania is a safe country and there is little evidence that they need asylum in the UK, though it does find that many women could be victims of trafficking. Now, one of the MPs on the committee which produced the report is Lee Anderson, who's the Conservative MP for Ashfield. Now, back in December, he questioned the Albanian ambassador on why Albanians didn't simply buy a cheap plane ticket to the UK and then claim asylum.
You explain to me why people are prepared to pay thousands of pounds to people smugglers, to traffickers, whatever you want to call them, rather than pay £28 on a flight from Albania.
Is exactly what I have asked just from the beginning, because they don't have the possibility to apply for legal migration. That's the problem. And to apply for visa. Because
No, let me come back to you. Why can't they just visit the country for 28 quid and then claim asylum?
Why?
Yeah. Why can't they visit the country for £28, travel on a plane for £28, come, i.e. on a holiday, and then claim asylum? Why can't they do that?
I don't have this information.
No, you do have this information. Why can't they do that?
Well, I can't suppose why they do that.
Is it perhaps, do you think, because if they come legally and produce a passport and documents, that our authorities, our border control, know exactly who these people are, where they're from, and any activities, illegal activities they may be involved in the past? Do you think that may be the reason?
Bingo. Yes, I think that probably is the reason. I'm delighted to say now that Lee Anderson joins me now. Lee, so this report has found that really there's been no need for us to offer asylum to anyone from Albania, pretty much, for the last couple of years, and yet we've been doing it, but hopefully now it stops. Is that right?
Well, look, I mean, isn't it a shame and a pity and a waste of taxpayers' money and parliamentary time that we've had to go through this investigation and this report to tell us all what we already know? Anybody, Patrick, with an ounce of common sense knows that Albania is a safe country. They're economic migrants coming over, and the reason they're coming over on a boat is because it's quicker and cheaper than coming by the correct means. And once they get here, they can abuse the asylum system, and many of them can just disappear into the black economy for a life of crime and criminality, and once again take advantage of this great country of ours. It really winds me up, it sticks in my throat that we've had to go through this on the Home Affairs Select Committee. Like I say, anybody with any common sense knows that they are economic migrants abusing our system.
Yeah, indeed. But now we're seeing a shift from Albania to India. So the same thing's going to happen here, isn't it? You know, in another couple of years' time, you and I are going to be sitting here having this conversation where you've had to write a report about the fact that the vast majority of people in India do not need asylum, and it is just men coming over looking for jobs who didn't meet the economic threshold of our legal migration system.
Yeah, this is not the points immigration based system that we've introduced. This is now the people smugglers. They're not bothered where the people come from anywhere on this planet. As long as they get their £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 per person for putting them on a boat, it doesn't matter whether they come from Eritrea, Sudan, from Albania, from Timbuktu. They will take the money and do their best to get them in this country as part of this trade. Look, we've got, you know my views on this, Patrick. I've been coming on this show now for nigh on 3 years. Till I'm blue in the face. And these scenes you've just shown again with predominantly men coming over, and I've said it and I've said it before, if they're coming from war-torn countries, what sort of men leave women and children behind and their families in a war-torn country? Not the type of men I want to be seeing coming to my country.
Well, no, absolutely not. Now, when it comes to the committee that's put this report together, this is a cross-party committee, Lee, isn't it? This is a cross-party committee. So now, whenever anyone in the Labour Party or the Lib Dems or the SNP or whoever stand up and say that, you know, we owe everybody some kind of, you know, huge debt and that we have to welcome everybody, we can point, can we not, to a cross-party committee who have decided 2 years too late that all of those Albanian men that were coming across the channel pretty much were basically on the take.
Yeah, it is a cross-party committee, as you say, Patrick. The chair actually is a Labour MP, Dame Diana Johnson. This is a consensus we've come to. This is after speaking with Albanian members of parliament, like you just shown before the clip, the Home Affairs Select Committee speaking to the Albanian ambassador. There was a trip to Albania with the Home Affairs Select Committee. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to that one, but, you know, it was a no-brainer. And I suppose some of the opposition MPs on our committee didn't really like what they were seeing because it didn't fit their narrative about these young men being victims of all sorts of nasty stuff. Look, we recognise that there are women, there are some women at risk in Albania being trafficked for sex, etc. But the young men you see coming on the boats, they're coming for one reason, and that's for money.
Lee, look, I've got to ask you, I hope you don't mind this, but it's pretty straightforward, really, in relation to the kind of verbal feud that's going on with Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. You're in an interesting position because you're in a red wall seat, OK? In fact, I was there last week and we had a decent day out. But do you owe Boris Johnson your seat? Where are you in all of this? Where are you in all of this now? Because it does seem like this war of words is hotting up a bit.
Well, look, I don't like to see blue on blue attacks, but what I will say, I think we need to move on as a party because the fear of a Labour government, actually, I mean, the thought of a Labour government terrifies me. But I will say this about Boris. In 2019, there was a particular reason why I won my seat in Ashfield. That was Boris, that was Brexit, and that was a feeling towards Jeremy Corbyn. So, yes, I do owe Boris my seat. But, you know, we've got to move on. We've got to stop falling out and bickering with each other, and hopefully we can unite and put the country first, Patrick.
You don't think Boris should leave the Conservative Party? There's rumours of him setting up with someone like Nigel Farage, for example.
I just think that's people like you, Patrick, in the media. You know, I know you've got a pound to earn. Probably been a little bit mischievous there, young man. But you know, it sells papers, I suppose, and it keeps it at the top of the news agenda. So who knows what's going to happen in the future? But my concerns is, as you know, Ashfield and this great country of ours.
Lee, look, thank you, and you're right. I was pulling your leg a bit there. Lee Anderson is the Conservative MP for Ashfield, which is in the red wall. Watch this space, though, people. I'll tell you what, watch this space, because that is that war of words between Boris and Rishi, and we'll have to see how that plays out. But something completely different now, as they say. Coronation Street star Nikki Sanderson has continued her testimony in the phone hacking trial. She is alleging that journalists working for Mirror Group newspapers unlawfully gathered information about her and other public figures, including Prince Harry. Joining us live from the High Court in London is our national reporter, Ellie Costello. Ellie, thank you very much. So what is the latest there today, then? What's happened?
Well, it's been a dramatic end to the day here in the Rolls building, Patrick, as the Coronation Street star Nikki Sanderson actually broke down in tears at the end of giving her evidence. She had to leave the courtroom. She stayed outside for about 10 minutes, and it was because her barrister, David Sherborne, asked her a final question when she was giving her evidence, and he said, "What's it been like to give evidence here at the High Court?" And she described it as humiliating and really traumatising. She said to talk about all of these stories in front of an open court made her feel like she was on trial. And she added that this past weekend was the most isolated that she had ever felt. She described her mum and her boyfriend trying to help her, but because she couldn't describe what had been happening in court to them, she said they couldn't help her, and she ended up feeling really alone. She described this as a horrific experience from start to end, and that is when she then left the courtroom in tears. But it must be said, Patrick, it's a lot quieter here than it was this time last week, when the world's media descended on the Rolls building in central London in order to try and capture a glimpse of Prince Harry, as he was another one of the claimants in this case. They're all bringing this claim against Mirror Group newspapers, which is the Sunday Mirror, the Daily Mirror and the Sunday People tabloids. And they're all accusing them of widespread unlawful activity up to 2011. So Mirror Group newspapers have apologised to Mrs Sanderson in this case. They say that they did obtain private information on 4 occasions, but they say there is no evidence of this happening in a widespread means. But this is week 5 of this trial, Patrick. It's set to continue for another month.
Ellie Costello, thank you very much. Outside the High Court there, our national reporter. We will keep you up to date. Ellie will keep you up to date on all of this. Now, Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish as the row over his resignation honours list continues. This one is going to run and run and run. And when I come back, I will have the very latest from Christopher Hope of The Telegraph, who's got a big announcement about the latest in the Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak drama. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends were like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and blink and you'll miss it this hour. It is a big one. Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak go to war, but who will win? I will have the latest breaking news line on this sorry saga in just a matter of moments with Christopher Hope from The Telegraph. You will not want to miss that. But also, we're going to be talking about this, another record day in the channel. So when Rishi Sunak said that his Stop the Boats plan was working, well, it turns out, Rishi, it isn't. I'll be delving into those numbers and also finding out exactly what we can expect going forward in the channel. I'm also going to be talking about this as well, because Albanians don't need asylum. Now, these two stories hopefully go hand in hand. It's taken 2 years and at least 12,000 Albanian men for us to realise that actually Albania is a safe country and they should not be granted asylum. That's the result of a new report. And Nicola Sturgeon, what on earth is going on north of the border? Yes, should Humza Yousaf grow a pair and ditch Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP? Or, of course, is it innocent until proven guilty? It is a firecracker of an hour. Don't take your eyes off it. Patrick Christys on GB News. GB Views at gbnews.com. And what I want to know from you is, are you Team Boris or are you Team Rishi? Because they have gone to war today. And like I said, in just a few moments, I'll be giving you the very latest in this sorry saga. You will not believe your ears. GB Views at gbnews.com. Now, headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said the former Prime Minister had asked him to overrule checks for House of Lords honours nominations. Now, Boris Johnson is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on the list despite being nominated by him. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names are absent. Rishi Sunak says overruling the vetting committee wasn't something he was prepared to do.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
Rishi Sunak. The American bank JP Chase has agreed a settlement of over £230 million with the past victims of the former financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. An unidentified woman filed a lawsuit against America's largest bank on behalf of multiple victims who Mr. Epstein sexually abused between 1998 and 2013. The lawsuit alleging that JP Morgan was complicit in the abuse by ignoring repeated warnings of Epstein's sex trafficking and continuing to do business with him after he was convicted of procuring an underage girl for prostitution in 2008. Epstein died in custody in 2019. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. It means the total number of people making the crossing so far this year has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. The former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan at the age of 86. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics, leaving behind a career marred by sex scandals and corruption allegations. He'd been suffering from leukemia and had recently developed a lung infection. Number 10 said Berlusconi made a huge impact on Italian politics over several decades and that thoughts are now with the Italian people and his family. Here, it's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge and insists she's innocent of any wrongdoing. GB News political reporter Catherine Forster has more.
Nicola Sturgeon's arrest yesterday is part of a 2-year police investigation Operation Branch Form into a missing £600,000 of donations given to fund a Scottish independence referendum that has never happened. Now, her husband, former Chief Executive Peter Morrell, was arrested in April at their home. Then the Treasurer, Colin Beattie, also arrested. And now former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, all questioned by police, all released without charge.
The 3 British people who were on board a diving boat that caught fire in the Red Sea off Egypt have died. The British tourists were originally declared missing when their scuba diving boat went up in flames off the resort town of Marsa Alam yesterday. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. An 11-year-old girl, a British girl, has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured. A neighbour is said to have shot at the girl and her family outside their house in Brittany. The town's mayor says the neighbours have had hostile exchanges in the past. The mother was also injured in the attack and her 8-year-old daughter managed to escape to raise the alarm. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. The Foreign Office says it is supporting the family. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon John Rainey is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and is due in court later. King Charles has been on the Flying Scotsman today, celebrating the 100-year-old engine. The King rode the famous steam train through the countryside on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, celebrating its 50th anniversary. When they pulled into the market town, the crew and the driver gave the King the royal treatment, inviting him to stand on the footplate and see how the train works. Charles was greeted by hundreds of well-wishers on the platform at its final destination. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Back now to Patrick.
Well, I start with the very latest on Boris Johnson, and war has broken out between the former Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak. Johnson has accused Sunak of talking rubbish over claims he asked him to overrule the House of Lords Appointments Commission, so the honours list. Now, it comes after the current Prime Minister, so Rishi, said that Johnson had asked him to take action that wasn't right. But Sunak says Johnson wanted him to do something he wasn't prepared to do after 8 of the former Prime Minister's nominations for the peerages were rejected. Well, one of Johnson's allies says Sunak actually secretly blocked honours for the former Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries and several others. Johnson announced on Friday he was quitting as an MP, leaving Sunak facing an awkward by-election in his Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. Now, Boris Johnson is extremely bullish about this whole thing. He very clearly feels as though there's pretty much no evidence to suggest that he lied to Parliament or anything like that, and that he has been the victim of a kangaroo court and a witch hunt, and he's being ousted. But as you're about to hear now from Christopher Hope, who's the politics associate editor at the Daily Telegraph, actually, it might go further than this, and Boris Johnson could, as far as we understand, face a lifetime ban. Is that correct? I believe Christopher joins me now. Christopher Hope. Yeah, there he is. I mean, can this be real? I mean, this seriously is bizarre that Boris Johnson, who, won a stonking election and has had to go through all of this, could face a lifetime ban.
Well, that's where we are, Patrick. Now, we're expecting this Privileges Committee report into whether Johnson lied over the Partygate saga last year to come either tomorrow or Wednesday. And then following that, there should be a vote on its findings. There normally is a vote and a debate the following week, probably next week, next Wednesday or Thursday. The concern is that because of what Johnson said last Friday about this committee accusing the chairman of bias unfairly, because she would say she wasn't biased at all, that's Harriet Harman. When this vote happens next week, the view is amongst allies of Johnson that Labour could try and amend the motion to add in an egregious a ban or some form of addendum that would say that Johnson can never, ever come back into Parliament. Something happened with John Bercow when he was accused of bullying. He was then told he could stay away from Parliament, and that might happen here in this situation too. And I'm told that can't happen by Johnson's team, but that doesn't stop Labour trying. And I think all bets are off at the moment with this story.
No, indeed, and I mean it is remarkable that they could be so rattled, surely, that they would want to try to ban him from life. I'm just not sure how this would play out with the public. Boris has got a core of support, quite a large core of support, and even people who don't like him would argue potentially that it sets a very worrying precedent that an individual who was democratically elected to lead this country can be banned from ever essentially setting foot in the House of Parliament again. Well, I find that bizarre.
Yeah, some would say it's bizarre, definitely. The justification, Patrick, is that he was so rude about the committee. He called it a kangaroo court. His allies have called it a kangaroo court. I, in fact, first reported the term kangaroo court when this entire protest started in May last year. That came from a source within the government. So the idea has been around for a bit. His allies have been using that term. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, a colleague of yours on GB News, he's been saying it. So the feeling had been, and one idea had been over the weekend, that this committee would add an addendum in there to name and to try and discipline or censure any MP who had been rude about the process. I understand that Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, was concerned about that, and now they'll just have a note in the report tomorrow, Wednesday, criticising those who have criticised it, but they may go further with Johnson when it gets to the House of Commons next week.
But this is very strange because you've got the likes of Angela Rayner standing up or after a few drinks at a Labour Party conference or whatever, saying that, the Conservative Party are running this banana republic. I mean, that is obviously criticising an institution in a way, the Conservative Party, a political opposition. Can we seriously be looking at a situation where a former Prime Minister of this country, who is slightly disrespectful to a committee that he fundamentally disagrees with, could face a lifetime ban from Parliament? I mean, that is basically what you would see in a dictatorship, is it not?
Well, we're in a democracy, aren't we? So that suggestion that you'd ban Johnson for life would go to a vote of members of the House of Commons, and if it went through, then it would apply. That's not a dictatorship, is it? It's a motion and approved by the House of Commons. You mentioned Angela Rayner there. She, of course, famously called Tories scum back at in the Labour Party conference. Faced no sanction for that. She eventually apologised after a few weeks because I think that was beyond the pale for many people, even in the Labour Party, calling the supporters of another party scum. That's not how we should do our democracy nowadays, and everyone would agree with that. But I think that is the point. That is what's at risk here for Johnson. I think he went so hard in on Friday night in that extraordinary statement there, attacking the very process he's being judged by, that this committee, which is meeting today to sign off the report, again it should be out tomorrow or Wednesday, wants to put a mark in the sand, a line in the sand as it were, saying this is unacceptable. The question is how far MPs take that when they vote on it next week. That's the question.
What do you think, Christopher, actually lies next for Boris Johnson? I've got Nigel Farage on in under an hour's time. He's going to be talking to me, answering some questions about the speculation about whether or not he's going to team up with Boris Johnson, so we'll find out what he has to say then. What are you hearing? What do you think could happen? Because there's even these ridiculous, I say ridiculous, rumours floating around that Nadine Dorries stood to one side so that Boris could have her seat. I mean, it's hard to know what the reality is, but I'm sure if anyone does, it's you. It's you. So come on, tell us all.
Well, on the Dorries rumour, I can't see that happening because anyone who takes a seat to stand for the Tory party must get signed off by Conservative Central Office, and there's simply no way I can see CCHQ giving any political platform under the current management to Boris Johnson. So I think he's out of politics. He's gone. He's in the rearview mirror until at least the next election, unless he stands for a different party. I'm sure your first question to Nigel Farage will be, what role can he play in your Reform Party? That is the renamed successor for the Brexit Party, and both these two men, Farage and Johnson, I think almost sum up the Brexit vote. One got the middle ground, Johnson, and one Farage got the kind of UKIP, the Eurosceptic right followed him. If they could form a group and say we're going to deliver Brexit for you properly, well, blimey, that will eat into the Tory support. The Tories would say, well, of course, that will just make it more easy for Keir Starmer to get the landslide that the polls forecast he should get at the moment. So they would argue, don't do that, Boris, think about us. But Boris, I think, is in no mood to listen or talk to his old friends in the party.
No, OK. Now, Christopher, I'm just getting something coming through to me now. I don't know if you've heard of it at all, but apparently, there are reports that Nigel Adams has officially resigned. Is that correct?
Well, it should have happened because he resigned on Saturday in a statement. So what that means is that although you can resign on Twitter, you have to formally resign and then the Treasury will remove your right to be the MP for Selby, and he will become the MP for the manor of somewhere or other. It's got these arcane names. It means you're formally removed. That is to be understood. And given the Tory party chose a candidate for Selby on Friday, and we knew Adams was going to do that, we are expecting a similar from Dorries and a similar for Johnson. I mean, when Johnson does it, of course, he should do that before the report comes out.
Yes, well, yes, indeed. Look, Christopher, thank you very, very much. Great stuff, as always. Christopher Hope there, who's Associate Editor of Politics at the Daily Telegraph. Look, joining me now is a political documentary maker, the man who, I can't quite say wrote the book on Boris Johnson, but wrote the documentary on him anyways, Michael Cockrell. Michael, thank you very much. You studied the character of Boris Johnson and the personality of the man for a very long period of time, at length. And what do you think his game plan is going to be now? What do you think he will be feeling now?
He'll be feeling very battered, I think. He has wanted... Well, when I made the first film about Boris Johnson called Boris Johnson, The Irresistible Rise, I discovered that at the age of 5, when he was asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, he said that he wanted to be world king. And he thought there was a position called King of the World, World King. And for a long time, that was his ambition, until about the age of 11 when he lowered his sights down to wanting to become the British Prime Minister. And he's always followed this path of trying to become the British Prime Minister. Say, for instance, when he was at Oxford after Eton, he stood for presidency of the Oxford Union, the Students' Debating Society, and he lost. And he then stood again. He stood first as a Tory and was ridiculed as a Tory toff. And then he lost. And so he then made it clear that he supported the new Social Democratic Party, the SDP, although without ever joining it. So he managed to get votes of people who were very keen on the SDP. And once he went into Parliament, he did all he could to become Prime Minister, and was thought that when David Cameron, who he had been at Eton with, won the race to the Tory leadership, he thought his time was past. So when David Cameron said, "Why don't you stand for Mayor of London?" He thought, "Well, I'll resign from the House, and this will give me a platform for 8 years, including during the Olympics." And it made his name, and he came back into the House. One of the things about him is, I remember one of the things he did in the film. We showed the famous footage of him on the zip wire. One of the things I do is show people clips of their previous life, and when he was stuck on the zip wire, he'd never really seen this before, and he said, "What you've got to understand, Michael, is when there he was hanging in the air. What you've got to understand is that's much more painful than you might think it is." I said, "Why is that, Boris?" He said, "Because when you've been stuck up there like that, chafing starts to occur." "Oh, really, Boris? Where was the chafing?" He said, "Well, Mike, I'm not going to go into it. Chafing started to appear." I said, "But in your book about the Olympics, you said that there was chafing in the groin area." He said, "Well, if I said that must be true, but I can never remember anything that I write." David Cameron said about that, the famous zip wire, he said, "Any other political leader anywhere in the world, that would be a disaster. For Boris, it'll be a great triumph." Cameron said he defies all laws of gravity.
Well, he does. And on that, and this is what I really want to pick your brains on, we are looking at an open war of words today between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak. A couple of MPs, of course, have stood down and they've gone in favour of Boris. I think that the red wall, not to bracket it all as one solid block, which the name might suggest that it is all too often in my view, but a lot of the red wall seats there are big backers of Boris Johnson. So whether or not by the time the next election comes around, Boris goes out campaigning there for those MPs, that might be something. Do you think, in your esteemed view of Boris Johnson, that he will be still planning to be Prime Minister again one day?
Yes, simple. It runs through his blood more than anything. The desire for power. It's the most powerful drug, really, power. And the last 6 years has been just extraordinary, really. It's been like a Netflix box set with channeling Shakespeare, Monty Python, and the Sopranos, written by a scriptwriter on speed.
Yeah, no, exactly. Just sorry to cut across you, but I just want one more at you, if that's all right, because there's talk now of people trying to ban him for life. And I just wonder whether or not, in your view, they've got one shot at this. If people are so adamant that Boris Johnson can never, ever get anywhere near Downing Street again, do you think they've got to ban him now, or he will do? He will find his way back in there?
I'd be very surprised if they succeeded in banning him for life. Normally, what they do as a sort of extra punishment, because I think they're going to have an extra punishment, calling it a kangaroo court and all that kind of stuff, is that they deprive the MP of his parliamentary pass, which means you can just walk into Parliament all the time. And with John Bercow, when he had been accused of bullying, they took his parliamentary pass away. But that's not banning him for life. Often, if you behave properly, you get your pass back.
Yeah, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because it's slightly different, really, isn't it, between John Bercow essentially bullying people and therefore losing a pass, and Boris Johnson saying that something's a kangaroo court, having been ousting himself, and then that leading to a ban. I do think that there's something a little bit more sinister about potentially removing Johnson's pass than there might be about Bercow's. But there we go. I could talk to you all day, Michael. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, so thank you very much, and I hope to do it again soon.
Thank you.
Michael Cockrell there,
That's
who's
very
a
nice.
political documentary maker, and did a couple of documentaries about Boris Johnson, knows the character, and that's what I wanted to do, just try and get a flavour of how will Boris Johnson be feeling now and what next. And you heard it from Michael there. It appears to be, with every fibre of Boris Johnson's being, this war of words with him and Rishi Sunak at the moment, and some people coming out and saying, oh, it's time for us to move on from Boris, like Grant Shapps. Everyone's a little bit sick of it. OK, Boris Johnson, I reckon, is just planning how on earth he can get back into Downing Street as quickly as possible. You can get loads more on this story, though, on our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country. Everywhere you look at the moment, GB News is winning, by the way. It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. Loads of you getting in touch. Just very quickly, gbviews@gbnews.com. Patrick, it shows how scared people are of Boris, that they are considering banning him from Parliament. This is going to end badly for Rishi and his supporters. That's from Robert. Thank you. You can have your email read out on the telly as well, gbviews@gbnews.com. But last week, Rishi Sunak claimed his plan to stop the small boats was working. What happened yesterday? More than 600 migrants crossed the channel. In fact, our Home and Security editor Mark White was on earlier. He was saying that he reckons that it could be close to 1,200. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Well, in the next few minutes, I will have the very latest on the Nicola Sturgeon scandal as calls for her to resign grow from within the SNP as well. And wouldn't you just know it, a cross-party committee of MPs says that Albania is, shock horror, a safe country and migrants from there shouldn't routinely be granted asylum. You can tell that by just going on holiday there and seeing it for yourself, as indeed tens of thousands of people do every single year. But last week, Rishi Sunak claimed that the government's plans to tackle the small boats crisis was working. Yesterday, a massive 616 migrants crossed the Channel. The day before that, there were quite a few as well. And today, according to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, there's been even more. But yesterday was the highest daily figure this year, and more asylum seekers arrived, like I said, in Dover today. And the number of people who have come over from France in small boats this year has now passed 8,500. The total in 2022 was more than 45,000. It looks as though we might be on for another record year. I'm joined now by Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, the second that Rishi Sunak came out and said that his plan to stop the boats was working, you and I were chatting live on air, and you poured cold water on that. You said, really, it's just the weather. I think you were right, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, it raised more than a few eyebrows. For those that watch the progress of the small boats across the Channel to the Kent coast on a regular basis, it was clear to us that actually what's been happening is that the weather conditions, mainly the fact that the weather has been northerly, northeasterly for quite some period of time, and not necessarily blowing very hard, but hard enough to churn up the waves and to push on shore in France. It makes it almost impassable for these small boats to get past. So that's why we've only seen some very small weather windows in the last few months that have allowed these boats to come. But when there are these weather windows, they come en masse, as they have done over the weekend. We saw some 800 almost who came on Saturday and into Sunday. And then again this morning when we were out, we saw more boats, 9 boats in total so far today that have crossed the English Channel. What's that, about 450 people to add to that total, so about 1,200 in the last 3 days. And even though it was quite foggy out there in the Channel, we saw the boats come through the mist. We saw the Border Force vessels loading these migrants on board with their red life jackets on the bow of one vessel and then at the stern of the vessel as well. And I think this is just really illustrative of the fact that any time, Patrick, we get a break in the weather, and remember, we are heading for the traditionally very flat, calm months of the summer now, we are likely to see many, many people trying to cross the Channel.
Yeah, indeed, Mark. Thank you very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor, who started the day out and about in a boat on the Channel, I must say, and then now he's back on dry land reporting the latest facts for us. Mark, thank you very much. Mark White there, our Home and Security Editor. Now, in the next hour or so, I'm going to have Nigel Farage on. In fact, in the next half an hour, I should say, I will have Nigel Farage on because he was in the Channel with Mark earlier. He was absolutely adamant that what Rishi Sunak was doing was not having an impact on the small boats crisis, i.e. it's not deterrent or policy that is stopping the numbers. It was weather and maybe just the time of year as well. He suspects that we could be on for another record year. In fact, we heard from Nigel just a short time ago. Like I said, he'll be in the studio a little later on in the show. He's going to give his take on the Channel migrant crisis. But also, I think the one thing that a huge amount of people want to know, and don't miss this, is whether or not he is going to team up with Boris Johnson, whether or not there's going to be some kind of new political movement. Can you imagine what that would do in the Red Wall? A ticket of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson sweeping the north of England, I dare say a few seats down south as well. So we will hopefully get a bit of confirmation on this from Nigel, but you can put some of your questions to him as well. Pop it in the inbox, gbviews@gbnews.com. You do not want to miss that. I will have a Nigel Farage exclusive right here on this show in about half an hour's time. We'll also have more on the migrant crisis as well, because thousands of Albanians have crossed the Channel on small boats, but a new report says that their country is safe. So I think I want some kind of compensation. When you think about the amount of money, the millions and millions and millions of pounds a day that we have spent to put people up in these asylum seeker hotels at the expense of the local economy, at the expense of the local community, at the expense in many cases of local safety, and people were shouting from the rafters that Albania is a safe country and there is a problem with organised Albanian crime in this country, why on earth were you and I and everyone we know made to pay millions and millions and millions of pounds a day to look after people who have travelled from a safe country? I'm sorry, but I want my money back. And I will ask as well, what's next for Nicola Sturgeon after she was arrested by police investigating the SNP's finances? And guess what? The knives are now out for her properly. Humza Yousaf, who many people regard as being in Nicola Sturgeon's back pocket, by the way, he's refusing to budge. He's saying, no, innocent until proven guilty. I'm absolutely not going to get rid of her. But a lot of people are saying she got rid of people for a lot less. And can you imagine if the British press had gone after Sturgeon and that story in the way that they went after Boris Johnson? What a world, eh? What a world. But now it's your latest headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour, as you've been hearing. Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said his predecessor had asked him to overrule the vetting committee for his House of Lords nominations. The former Prime Minister is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on his resignation honours list despite being nominated. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma, Nigel Adams are among those MPs whose names were absent. And Downing Street has defended the investigation into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties. It's after Mr Johnson attacked the Privileges Committee, describing it as a kangaroo court before announcing his resignation as an MP. The inquiry is thought to have ruled the former Prime Minister lied to Parliament when he said COVID rules were followed. The final report will be published later. And as you've been hearing, more than 600 people have crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. And it means the total number of people making the crossing so far has reached 8,500. At this point last year, the total was 10,000. It's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the Scottish National Party following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge pending further investigation and insists she is innocent of any wrongdoing. An 11-year-old girl has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured. A neighbour is said to have shot the British girl and her family outside their house in Brittany. The mother was less seriously injured in the attack and her 8-year-old daughter managed to escape to raise the alarm. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. Those are your latest news headlines. More on all those stories, head to our website, gbnews.com.
OK, let's just bring you a little bit of breaking news. Former President Donald Trump is heading to Newark Airport in New Jersey before he's expected to depart to Florida. Trump faces federal charges and will appear at a courthouse in Miami tomorrow. The former president was indicted for illegally retaining classified national security documents after leaving office. And that, I believe, is footage there of the Donald Trump motorcade heading towards the airport. He is travelling, as we speak anyway, to Newark Airport in New Jersey before he is expected to depart to Florida. Trump is facing federal charges and will appear at a courthouse in Miami tomorrow. The former president was indicted, of course, for illegally retaining classified national security documents after leaving office. You are looking at President Trump's motorcade there en route to the airport. More on that as we get it now. To the latest on the crisis at the SNP, much closer to home. There is a crisis everywhere you look. It's a fascinating world we live in, actually, isn't it? Just a quick comment on this, which is, Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, been ousted and now potentially having his parliamentary pass taken off him for life, which would be remarkable. Nicola Sturgeon, as you're about to be finding out about, was nicked and then released. And then you've got President Trump there on his way to face charges. I mean, it's been a bit of a bonkers world, hasn't it, politically speaking? But to the latest on the SNP, leader Hamza Yusuf says that he won't suspend Nicola Sturgeon after she was arrested yesterday. Sturgeon was questioned for around 7 hours before she was released pending further investigation. She says she's innocent of any wrongdoing. Let's just go now to Edinburgh and speak to our political reporter, Catherine Forster. Catherine, she was released, pending further investigation. What does all of this actually really centre around? Because we've seen the police tents in the front garden, we've seen the house search, we've seen a husband arrested and then released, somebody else as well. Hamza Yusuf is kind of scratching around a little bit at the moment. What's going on? It's about money, isn't it?
It is. It's fundamentally about £600,000 in donations which were given to the Scottish National Party, earmarked for a second Scottish independence referendum, which obviously has not happened. It's about where that money has gone, what has happened to it. It's a Police Scotland Operation Branch Form. It's been going on now for almost 2 years, but it does feel like it's coming to something of ahead. We had Nicola Sturgeon, who of course has ruled Scottish politics pretty much for almost a decade, up until February, when she very suddenly and inexplicably resigned. Her husband, former chief executive of the SNP, Peter Morell, was arrested at the beginning of April. There was a forensic tent put up in the couple's garden. A £100,000 motorhome that was parked in Nicola Sturgeon's mother-in-law's drive was seized by police. The treasurer, Colin Beattie, was arrested, questioned, released without charge, and then a gap of a few weeks, and then, as pretty much seemed inevitable, to be honest, given that Nicola Sturgeon's name was the third name on these accounts that are being queried, Nicola Sturgeon herself, former First Minister, questioned on Sunday. Now, it wasn't as spectacular as the police turning up at her house. She knew on the Saturday that this was going to be happening, so she went along to the police station and they then arrested her. But it really is absolutely extraordinary, isn't it? And it's not even the first time that a former First Minister has been questioned by police, because, of course, Nicola Sturgeon's predecessor, Alex Salmond, was accused of multiple counts of sexual harassment, was ultimately cleared and acquitted. But really extraordinary. And Hamza Yusuf, now her predecessor, under a lot of pressure to suspend her, but he is currently not budging. He says he sees no reason. He says it's personally painful for him, but he says he's going to treat her the same as Colin Beattie, for instance, and, innocent until proven guilty. But of course, he was the continuity candidate. He did have a very close relationship with her, so this obviously extremely difficult for him.
No, exactly. Catherine, thank you very much. Catherine Forster there, GB News' political reporter, who's in Edinburgh, has been putting a shift in all day as this absolutely fascinating story continues to unfold. Calls actually from within the SNP, from a variety of different MPs, to say, look, just end this now. Nicola Sturgeon has become bigger than the party itself in this regard, and this is really the killer line, actually. This soap opera has gone far enough. Nicola Sturgeon suspended others from the SNP for an awful lot less, and that is from Agnes McNeil. She's one of the SNP's longest-serving MPs, having represented the Western Isles since 2005. So, you know, that's quite strong stuff, really. I'm joined now by Andrew Liddle, who's a historian and a columnist at the Courier newspaper. Andrew, thank you. Does Humza Yousaf need to grow a backbone and suspend Nicola Sturgeon, or is it all innocent until proven guilty?
Well, I think Humza's shown himself to be very weak, actually, in not suspending the former First Minister. As your correspondent pointed out, there is a precedent here for suspension. Indeed, Nicola Sturgeon herself, when she was leader of the party, suspended a number of parliamentarians when they found themselves in a similar situation. So I think there is a personal relationship here that's coming between Humza Yousaf and perhaps his better judgment. Certainly, he's using the example of Colin Beattie and indeed of Peter Morell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, as an excuse to not suspend the former First Minister. But that's a relatively new precedent. And if Nicola Sturgeon had been in charge, I think she certainly would have pushed for a suspension.
I mean, it's an absolute terrible look for the SNP at the moment, is it not? They've got into all sorts of hot water over this ridiculous gender nonsense. Then Nicola Sturgeon resigns, she says she's tired, and then a complete coincidence, just a few weeks later, her husband, herself, somebody else whose name escapes me now, gets arrested and then released, and the police tents in the front lawn. And I mean, the longer this goes on, I mean, Humza Yousaf, is he just like a lamb to the slaughter here, do you think? I mean, is this just going down terribly with voters in Scotland at the moment? Because I would suggest that it makes you question everything the SNP has to say, really.
Absolutely. I think there's a line from Napoleon, I think, about, generals should be lucky. And Humza Yousaf is certainly very unlucky, although largely he has only himself to blame, particularly in relation, as you say, to some of the policy missteps they've made around gender recognition. That obviously began with Nicola Sturgeon, but has carried on under Humza's leadership. And this investigation, I think, is a disaster for the SNP. It's a constant. Every week there's further developments. We've now had 3 arrests. It's very, very difficult to see how, I think, Humza Yousaf and the SNP can recover from this. And their stranglehold that they've held on Scottish politics for more than a decade, I think now seems to be really, really weakening quite quickly and quite remarkably.
Yeah, look, thank you very, very much. It's great to have you on the show, Andrew. I hope to catch up with you very soon. So I don't think this is going to be the last we'll hear of all this, do we? But Andrew Liddle is historian and columnist with the Courier. I do think there is a massive discrepancy between what's going on and the way that things are reported, or the way that certain stories were gone after. When you really think about, whether or not Boris Johnson was ambushed by cake, or whether or not there was some kind of minuscule rule breaking that took place, or whatever, and then you look at, where is a huge amount of money? Where is that amount of money? And that's really what this centres around. And what was that money used for north of the border? I would argue that maybe there should have been more attention paid to that, because when you really look at it, it does seem bizarre that this wasn't something that was, really raised with the British public until Nicola Sturgeon had actually quit and been allowed to quit as well. GBviews at gbnews.com. But wouldn't you just know it? There's no basis for Albanian migrants to seek asylum in the UK. According to a committee of MPs, they're fleeing a safe country, which begs the question, why did we allow tens of thousands of them in? Why did we make it so easy for them? Why did we make it so easy for the taxpayers to have to fork out through the nose millions of pounds a day? And then so many of them absconded as well. We looked at a country that you can fly to for around £30, that is a safe country, that is a tourist destination. And for some reason, we were gaslit into believing that tens of thousands of fighting-age young men had to flee that country because they were victims of goodness knows what. And we had to pay for that. Well, now a report has come out to say that actually there's no need for it. I don't know about you, but I am desperate to have this taxpayers' money back. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "No, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. News channel.
Well, in just a few minutes, there is a strange story of some fishy business involving the England's ladies angling team, which I am looking forward to bringing to you. And just after 5 o'clock, I will speak live to Nigel Farage, who'll give his unique take on Boris Johnson and the small boats crisis in the Channel. On Boris, what everyone in my inbox is asking me, which I will ask Nigel live in just a few minutes' time, are you going to go into political business with him? Is there going to be an offer to Boris Johnson? Are you going to end up either setting up a new party or getting involved with one of the parties that already exists and trying to do something about that? So I'm going to be putting all of this to Nigel very, very shortly, so make sure you stay tuned. But now, to a landmark report that blows away these claims that Albanians arriving in the UK on small boats should be given asylum. A cross-party committee has found that Albania is a safe country, and there is little evidence that Albanians are at risk there. So why on earth have we been paying millions of pounds every single day, clogging up hotels, etc., for fully grown men who've just come here, essentially, from a country that they could have just visited on holiday? The report found that nearly 46,000 people crossed the Channel in small boats last year. More than a quarter of those, so around 12,000, were Albanian. though other reports have estimated that figure to be as high as 15,000. Hard to tell, given the fact that they're not always honest about where they've come from, and they don't tend to stick around that long once they get here either. But 10,000 of those who came from Albania last year were single adult men. Lee Anderson was on earlier. He said, we wouldn't want people who leave the women and children behind anyway in a time of strife, would we? But it means that the number of Albanians coming to the UK on small boats went up from 800 in 2021 to more than 12,000 last year. So those are the ones we know about. Those are the ones in this country that we know about. In conclusion, the report says that Albania is a safe country and there is little evidence that Albanians need asylum in the UK, though it does find that many women could be victims of trafficking. Joining me now is Jeremy Hutton from Migration Watch UK. Jeremy, a report that's taken a couple of years that demonstrates exactly what we all already knew and makes me even more angry about the tens of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money that has gone towards supporting people who, if they wanted to see Britain, should have just come here on holiday.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Thanks for having me on, first of all. Yes, I share your frustration. It's quite incredible, really, that it's taken this long for the Home Affairs Committee to report what we all knew at the time. This was what everyone understood was the case back in, November, August, etc. last year. We all knew Albania wasn't some hellhole. It wasn't a war-torn place that people needed to flee from, fear of the safety of their lives. We already knew that Albanians were massively overrepresented in the UK prison system. So it's quite inexplicable that it took them this long to get through this report, go on a little trip to Albania and just tell us what was so obvious.
But surely, Jeremy, now, we've got this massive backlog, OK, this asylum seeker backlog that we need to get through in order to clear these hotels and to get deportation flights taking off. If anyone has Albania as their nationality on it now, pretty much, they should presumably just be deported.
Yes, there doesn't really seem to be any excuse for letting them go through the whole process. There is some form of fast track that the government are doing to get them through it quicker, but there is more they could do to actually get them through the system. They could just declare all claims from Albania inadmissible, maybe keeping up some route for trafficked women, for example. However, it's just completely baffling that so many people have been stuck in the asylum system. And all this encourages is more of them to come to the UK, knowing that they'll be able to stay in the UK for 1 to 2 years whilst their claim is done and make a bit of money on the side anyway.
Well, absolutely. They could abscond, they could find the way of having children, they can do whatever. I mean, that report that came out that everyone was very happy to, batter the government with, going, you're losing children from these asylum seeker hotels. Excuse me. I don't see many children, walking around with full beards and looking about the age of 40, to be honest with you. I think those tend to be more of the people that are going missing and just disappearing into the underworld at the moment. But surely, Jeremy, Rishi Sunak now, this is all the proof that he needs. He can go, my voters, the taxpayers, are paying £6 million a day minimum. I've got 2 more barges on the way. I've got a report that says Albania is a safe country. If you're from Albania and you've come here illegally, I'm sorry, but you're getting deported. I mean, he's got all the excuses he needs to be able to say that, hasn't he?
Absolutely. I don't think anyone needs any more proof, and I don't think anyone ever really did. I mean, it's good to have the committee saying this and putting it in writing so we can all, basically, that we're all vindicated from several months ago.
Yeah.
But he needs no more proof. And the concerning thing is the committee does end its report saying, oh, well, maybe you should create more visas so they can come legally instead. And I don't think that's really what people want. They see this as a problem. They want to stop that problem, not let more of them in on legal routes.
Well, as the Albanian ambassador who was grilled by Lee Anderson basically had to front up to, which is that if you could come here legally through an existing visa scheme, which you have to meet certain economic requirements, then you would be doing it, really. And the reason that a lot of them are spending tens of thousands of pounds or thousands of pounds in order to come across the channel illegally is, I suspect, very often so that we don't know exactly who they are or maybe what their criminal record has been. But Jeremy, thank you. Jeremy Hudson there from Migration Watch UK. Now, there is huge controversy in what's normally a gentler world of angling. Now, half of England ladies' team have quit after a trans woman was selected for a competition. Becky Lee Birtwistle Hodges, who was born male, was picked for the home nation's Shore Fishing Championship. One of Hodges' former teammates is reported to have said that she has hands like shovels, and so shouldn't be taking part in the angling situation there. We're going to be talking about this, but also an issue that kind of ties into it a little bit, which is that on the NHS now, puberty blockers for children are going to be banned unless you're taking part in a clinical trial, which is massive news. I think people are now looking at this and thinking maybe this is the day that children were actually saved in Britain. So puberty blockers for young children, which were being dished out like candy, are now going to be stopped unless it is part of some kind of clinical trial, which I think is going to be great news for children going forward who maybe were a little bit confused and accidentally wandered into a situation where they made life-changing permanent decisions. But Nigel Farage has had a busy day. This morning he was broadcasting from the English Channel. In a few minutes he will join me right here in the studio to discuss two things. One, the migrant crisis, and, crucially, the latest on Boris Johnson. My inbox is jam-packed full of people saying, please can you ask Nigel if he's going to go into politics with Boris? Well, I will. Just give me a few minutes and I'll do it. Don't go away. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, and Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak are at war. The latest line that dropped about half an hour to an hour ago was that Boris Johnson may end up being banned from Parliament for life. What do you make of that? Would that be witch hunt complete? Is Rishi on a hiding to nothing over this? I asked that question because of this story as well. It's, of course, what's been going on in the Channel. Rishi Sunak stood there and said, I'm stopping the boats. We are stopping the boats. And it turns out that yesterday we had the highest number of arrivals so far this year, and we could be on for another record year. But who better to talk about those two stories than this man, Nigel Farage. Nigel will be joining me in the studio in just a matter of moments. Two big topics to get stuck into there. He was in the Channel this morning on a boat watching the French escort one of those dinghies into British waters. He saw that with his own eyes. But also, crucially, the big question on a lot of people's lips at the moment is, are Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage going to team up and either form a new party or do some damage at the next election? Well, I will ask him in just a few minutes' time, so make sure you keep watching. Also, I'm going to be talking a lot about this. No puberty blockers for kids. This is an absolute result for people who thought it was always incredibly dangerous for children to get puberty blockers on the NHS. Well, it's stopped, OK? So, good stuff. People are saying this is the day that children's lives were indeed saved. Patrick Christys on GB News. Yes, loads to get stuck into. GBviews at gbnews.com. Who do you think will win the battle in this war? Is it Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak? GBviews at gbnews.com. Nigel Farage joins me after the headlines.
Patrick, thank you. At 2 minutes after 5, these are your main news stories. And as you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said the former Prime Minister had asked him to overrule checks for House of Lords honours nominations. Now Boris Johnson is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on the list, despite being nominated by him. Nadine Dorries, Salok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names are absent. Rishi Sunak says overruling the vetting committee wasn't something he was prepared to do.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to, either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
The American bank JP Morgan Chase has agreed a settlement of over £230 million with past victims of the former financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. An unidentified woman filed a lawsuit against the bank on behalf of multiple victims who Mr. Epstein, she said, sexually abused between 1998 and 2013. The lawsuit alleged that JP Morgan was complicit in the abuse by ignoring repeated warnings of Epstein's sex trafficking and continuing to work with him after he was convicted of procuring an underage girl for prostitution. Epstein died in custody in 2019. Former US President Donald Trump is heading to Florida to face charges in classified documents cases. Mr. Trump is accused of allegedly keeping unlawful US national security documents and lying to officials who tried to recover them. Despite the former president's legal battles, his popularity among voters is still high as opinion polls show him far ahead of his competition for the presidential nomination. The former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan at the age of 86. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics and leaving behind a career marred by sex scandals and corruption allegations. He'd been suffering from leukemia and had recently developed a lung infection. Number 10 says Berlusconi made a huge impact on Italian politics over several decades and that their thoughts are with the Italian people and his family. Here it's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was later released without charge and insists she's innocent of any wrongdoing. GB News political reporter Catherine Foster has more.
Nicola Sturgeon's arrest yesterday is part of a 2-year police investigation Operation Branch Form into a missing £600,000 of donations given to fund a Scottish independence referendum that has never happened. Now, her husband, former Chief Executive Peter Morrell, was arrested in April at their home. Then the Treasurer, Colin Beattie, also arrested. And now former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, all questioned by police, all released without charge.
The 3 British people who were on board a diving boat that caught fire in the Red Sea off Egypt have all died. The British tourists were originally declared missing when their scuba diving boat went up in flames off the resort town of Marsa Alam yesterday. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. An 11-year-old British girl has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured. A neighbour is said to have shot Solane Thornton and her family outside their house in Brittany. The town's mayor said the neighbours had had a hostile relationship in the past. The mother was also injured in the attack and her 8-year-old daughter Celeste managed to get help by escaping. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested and the Foreign Office says it's supporting the family. A man has appeared in court charged with the murder of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in the early hours of June the 3rd. A murder inquiry was launched after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena yesterday. 26-year-old Brandon Johnson Riley is accused of murder. A 34-year-old man has also been charged with assisting offenders and is due in court later on today. King Charles has been aboard the famous locomotive, the Flying Scotsman, today, celebrating 100 years of the steam engine. His Majesty's Royal Train was being pulled by the famous engine on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway, which was also celebrating its 50th anniversary. The crew and driver invited the King to stand on the engine footplate as she pulled into the station platform, where well-wishers greeted them. The Flying Scotsman covered at least 2 million miles during its service on Britain's railway network and was retired in 1963. You're with GB News. More news as we get it. Now back to Patrick.
Two big stories, really, in town today. The war between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak and whether or not Boris Johnson is going to be banned for life from the parliamentary estate, whether or not there are real moral implications on what's happened there. So I'm going to be talking about all of that, but also the fact, and it is a fact now, that the Stop the Boats campaign is not working. And here to talk about both of these things is the man himself, Nigel Farage, who joins me now. Nigel, thank you very, very much. I want to start with the channel because you were in the channel this morning and you were seeing dinghies being escorted through essentially to British waters, weren't you? You called it straight away that the Stop the Boats policy is not having an impact. It's all about the weather.
Last Monday, Sunak turns up in Dover. Not something that was pre-announced, but they knew it was going to be a windy day. So he could stand there in Dover Harbour, knowing with certainty that not a single dinghy would cross, and say, look at us, we're doing fantastically well. Crossings over the Mediterranean are up 30%. It's 20% down to our country this year so far. Our policies are beginning to work. And I said live from the chair that you're in now last Monday, wait till next Sunday, because I could see the forecast.
Yeah.
The anticyclone that had dominated the weather down from the North Sea for all this time has gone. So we saw 87 come on Saturday, 616 came yesterday, and today, I don't yet know. I was out this morning. It was like a full-scale French naval operation. It was foggy in places, it was dangerous, and the French Navy, as I left, there were 4 French naval vessels escorting dinghies towards border force.
So when Rishi Sunak stood up and said the French have stopped 50% more boats than they did last year...
It was a full-scale French naval operation today to shepherd them to border force, and you can listen in to the channel. We're not supposed to, but you can listen to the channel when they talk to each other. And it's like, you know, there you go, boys, and border force say, oh, thanks ever so much.
Really?
It's unbelievable. So the boats have not been stopped. There is no disincentive. Yes, we've sent a few Albanians back, but we're seeing now people coming from the Punjab increasingly. And nothing this government has done is going to make a blind bit of difference. And I would be very surprised if over the next 2 months, 10,000 don't come.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anything, we'll just do with the Indians who are coming over what we did with the Albanians, which is let a load of them come in, let them join a backlog, and then in a couple of years' time, we'll have some government committee who says, oh, sorry, they're not actually seeking asylum at all.
Well, we've also learned that anyone that comes by boat through the traffickers will be treated the same as anybody else making an application for asylum. So actually, government policy in the last week has softened, not hardened, and it brings me to a bigger point. Can we actually trust anything Rishi Sunak says?
Well, on that note, this brings me on to the other big story of the day. And as you can imagine, Nigel, my inbox here has been full of a pretty straightforward question, so I will just ask it to you. Are you going to join political forces with Boris Johnson?
First things first, there's an open civil war now going on between Sunak and Johnson. I thought the Sunak comment on the news a moment ago about the honours list and why some of them weren't accepted. That, you know, there was Sunak saying he didn't think it was right. So he's kind of telling you Johnson's dodgy.
Yes.
You know, this is turning very, very nasty. Now, I think the Conservative Party are back to being an establishment party. And there's only one winner, in my view, in this battle between Sunak and Johnson. I think Johnson ultimately will be driven out of the party. That's the view that I take. Yes, there are loyalists like Jacob Rees-Mogg and people like that. But, you know, the one thing the Conservative Party will not live with is what it sees as disloyalty. And walking out and handing, without even a battle, the Uxbridge seat to the Labour Party is not something that will go down well. And you see, yes, of course, the usual suspects like Lord Heseltine, but there are people saying this man must never stand again for us for a parliamentary seat. And so I would say this, if Johnson wants a future involved in active politics, and if he wants to try and fight for the Brexit legacy, which, if there is a big Labour majority, it could be game on again as far as Brexit's concerned, albeit in stages, you know, single market rules, associate membership, you can see the route it will go. But he's got to consider doing something outside of the Conservative Party. And that was why I talked about reform, Richard Tice, me, characters like that. You know, we could be a few years away from having to refight the Brexit battle. And I think Johnson should think about it.
You and Boris are absolutely massive in the Red Wall. And that surely is a gift that you don't want to turn down.
Well, I mean, look, you know, Boris and I disagree fundamentally on some of the net zero lunacy.
Yes.
His completely relaxed approach to open-door immigration, we have different views. But I've never met anybody in politics whose policies can turn on a sixpence the way they can with Boris, and he could reinvent himself. You know, he's very good at all of that, and he does carry it off. Look,
so the door's open.
You know, I mean, frankly, when it comes to thinking over the next few years how we can fight for the Brexit legacy, I've not always been his biggest fan at all. But when it comes to the really big issue of our independence, what I was saying over the last couple of days is, you know, if we could work together to save the Brexit legacy, we should certainly think about it. But for him, it would mean being outside the Conservative Party. And that's probably very difficult for him and his supporters to accept. But I see Sunak winning this battle.
OK, so you think Sunak will win the battle? And do you think that there is something more wide at the heart of this, which is that an individual who did win a stonking majority at the last general election can be ousted by a committee and then potentially be banned from having a parliamentary passport for his life?
Well, unfortunately, Patrick, he gave too much ammunition to his enemies. Too many unforced errors, and we saw this all through his premiership, and actually we'll look back on it as being a tragedy. An 80-seat majority, something that I did my best to help him with all of that, and a chance to really change politics for good. He did none of it.
No, look, Nigel, thank you very, very much. I know you've got a show to plan for, so you're going to get cracking with that. Any ideas what's coming up?
A small boat special. Right. Some amazing footage. Drone footage of what we saw on the channel today.
Look, I always appreciate your time, Nigel. Thank you very, very much. Nigel Farage there. Make sure that you do tune in a little bit later on for Nigel. Right, OK, you get loads more on these stories and everything that Nigel's just said there on our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest-growing national news website in the country. It's got the best analysis and opinion, as well as the latest breaking news. And there's great news today for campaigners looking to protect vulnerable children. This is some genuinely good news. Puberty blockers will not routinely be offered to kids at new regional gender identity clinics in England. Previously, you went in, you could say something along the lines of, like, I feel I might be born into the wrong body, and then some trigger-happy doctor goes, here's a load of pills, alter your gender forever. Well, no. Finally, common sense has prevailed, and kids now will be much safer, actually, bizarrely, having to save them from the medical community. Who thought that would ever have to happen? I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Two big stories coming your way. Albania is a safe country, which I think should really mean that we should all get our money back for the sheer millions and millions and millions that we've been spending on people who've just come from a perfectly safe nation to come and live in our hotels and then wider communities for a period of time. I'm also going to be talking a lot about some good news when it comes to the protection of children in relation to their gender. So no longer will they be able to essentially walk into an NHS clinic and say, please let me have some irreversible medication to change my gender. No, that will only take place in clinical trials now, which is a good thing. But before that, just going to get into the inbox because we had Nigel Farage on moments ago saying the door is open for Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is at war with Rishi Sunak, and as Nigel was saying, he thinks that Rishi Sunak will win that war and that Boris will be ousted from the Conservative Party. That could leave him politically homeless. It could also coincide with his parliamentary pass being taken off him if Labour Party potentially have their way from a vote in the Commons. And so a proper number would have been done on Boris Johnson, one of the most democratically elected prime ministers of our time. Nigel Farage, as many of you will have heard, left the door wide open for him and said that there was maybe some kind of deal that could be done there between Reform or Nigel and Boris and whatever. I'm going to go a few of your emails on this right now. If Boris joins forces with Nigel, they will dominate the Red Wall. They'll certainly get my vote plus the majority of like-minded Red Wall residents. That is from Dam. Hi, Patrick. In my opinion, Sunak is finished in the next general election. As a lifelong Tory voter, sadly, my vote is probably going to go to Reform. That's from Andrew. Nigel may be right that Sunak might win this battle with Boris, but he will lose the war with the Conservative Party members. That's from Mark. Loads of these coming in. That is fascinating. You heard it here on this very show, which is that the door is open to Boris Johnson if he wants to maybe consider doing something with Nigel Farage and potentially Reform, etc. So that's one that's not going away anytime soon as that war of words between Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson continues to hot up. But let's crack on with this story now, because clinicians and psychologists have welcomed NHS England's decision to ban puberty blockers for children suffering from gender dysphoria outside of clinical research. This is a good thing. A report into Children's Gender Services said there was gaps in evidence around the hormone-suppressing drugs. The news comes as 2 new regional centres are to be opened, replacing the controversial Tavistock Gender Clinic, which is closing after a damning independent review deemed it was not safe. Joining me now to discuss this is psychotherapist and founder of GenSpect, Stella O'Malley. Stella, thank you for this. This, some people are saying, is a victory for child safety, because they felt as though for far too long it was very easy for a child to walk into a clinic, or possibly taken there by their parents, and get on these puberty blockers and make essentially irreversible medical interventions in their personal parts, and that now this is going to be stopped. What was your take?
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the UK have carried out a review, which is what they should have done in the first place, and decided that it's not appropriate to stop children's sexual development. We've never done it before. Puberty blockers were created for children who had precocious puberty. This would be very, very young children who had effectively entered into puberty like at 4 or 5, and that's why they were created. They were never made for the purposes of children who are very unhappy in their puberty, in their natural or their healthy puberty. And they gave it to gender distressed children as an experiment. It's a very young experiment. There's no evidence base behind it. And it hasn't gone well. There's been an awful lot of distress. There's been an awful lot of children who have now regret it, who've gone up to adults and say, I didn't get a chance to experience a sexual awakening. And they move on to a synthetic sexual awakening by taking cross-sex hormones. So it's tampering, it's authoritarian, and it's tampering in the sexual awakening of a human when they're still a child. So thankfully, the UK have put serious conditions around this, and now there's going to be clinical trials. And that is dubious. Yeah.
Can I just ask, why on earth did this ever happen, that we had to go through so much just to essentially save children from people in the medical community?
We shouldn't have had to. It was deeply inappropriate. It was a very high-handed, ideological-driven decision that was taken as a result, it's now emerged, as a result of activism. So lobby groups pushed for it. And it was almost like a consumer model of healthcare. Rather than seeing yourself as a patient and your distressed child as a patient, it saw the child as a consumer who could seek a certain medication because they thought it would make them feel better. And so as a result, it makes the patient a client or a customer, and it's a very, very, very inappropriate intervention because it's so heavy-handed. And yes, of course, some people might say, yeah, it was great for me. It's not really relevant because that's not how healthcare happens. Healthcare shouldn't be on demand. And I think it's very important to point out that there are going to be clinical trials now, and arguably we've had clinical trials. There's been a large-scale clinical trial. We got the results. The results was no improved psychological functioning, and the results were 98 to 100% of these children go on to cross-sex hormones. We have the results. We don't need this clinical trial, and it was dubiously unethical in the first place. We don't need to continue with clinical trials.
This is what I can see happening.
Good to slow it down.
This is what I can see happening, which is really sinister, which is kids being involved in clinical trials. I mean, can you imagine being treated like lab rats, really? We've had the clinical trial. So on paper, initially, this seems like a good thing, that it's going to be more difficult for people to make, a really potentially devastating medical intervention whilst they're a child. Issues of consent there, issues of morality there. But my concern would be now is how many doctors are willing to clinically experiment on children for the sake of pushing some kind of warped trans ideology?
Well, any doctors who are willing to clinically experiment on children and to stop their puberties, to stop their sexual awakening and stop their sexual development are immediately, in my view, dubious. Should they be in that position? Because it's such an authoritarian, heavy-handed, invasive procedure. I would have my issues with anybody who would do it. And certainly I was heartened to see that the GIDS clinicians left in their droves when they realised that this is not appropriate. We've never done it before. There's no reason. You allow people, if they're healthy bodies, you don't mess with a healthy body. People who are lucky enough to have a physically healthy body, you protect it. And yeah, of course, if you have mental health distress, there's many, many, many ways to help. I'm a psychotherapist. There's many ways to help people in deep mental distress. And I'm not undermining it, but you certainly don't weaken a healthy body.
No, indeed. I mean, there are a lot of people who go to a GP for a variety of different ailments and, maybe mental issues as well, and actually find it remarkably difficult to get on medication that they think that they need. But for a while anyway, from the outside looking in, it appeared to be incredibly easy for me to have taken a young child to a medical facility and said, can you alter this person's hormonal makeup for me because they have a feeling? And that's not really the way that I think it should work. So hopefully this does change now. Can I just ask you about something else that's kind of same but different when it comes to this? Half of England's ladies angling team have quit over a trans woman, I'm using the quote here, with hands like shovels, who used to be a rugby player, being selected to join their squad. I'm just wondering whether or not now the decision like this in the NHS to not now be dishing out like candy hormone issues to children might start to wake some people up to some other injustices that are going on at the moment, namely in the world of sport.
Yeah, basically there's been a huge political, ideological move for people to accept things that would never have been accepted previously and will not be accepted in the future. Stopping children's sexual development, allowing robust, intact males to play on women's sports teams because of their feeling in their head. It's not going to remain, and well done to the angling team who just said no. They've got a boundary. They said, no, this is for women. And it makes a difference if you're a man because you're stronger, you're faster, you're broader, you're taller. All of those things make a huge difference in sports. And I think we're going to look back in this period and think we collectively lost our mind. We thought it's like everybody stopped thinking. Can I just say there are other conditions? There's things like body identity integrity disorder where people want to amputate an arm or they want to amputate a leg. And they won't get the amputations. Only, frankly, unethical surgeons will carry out this. You will always get snake oil salesmen and unethical people and the fringes of society who will do things to people that they shouldn't do. But the NHS, what they were doing was profoundly inappropriate. And I'm thrilled that they're putting some guardrails around it. And I look forward to the day when they realise it's not ethical to have a clinical trial to stop a child's puberty. It's not ethical to weaken a healthy body. What we do is we help them psychotherapeutically in many different ways.
Look, Stella, thank you very much. Great stuff there. I hope to chat to you again soon. Stella O'Malley there, who's just a psychotherapist and founder of GenSpect, who's just discussing anyway the NHS basically now not going to be dishing out gender-transforming drugs to children, which is a news story that I never thought would have to cover. But there we go. At least the right outcomes happen in the end. Right, breaking news for you now, though. Boris Johnson has officially resigned as an MP. He said on Friday evening that he was quitting as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip, but it has now been confirmed that he has resigned. Nigel Adams, who was the Tory MP for Selby in North Yorkshire, has also officially resigned. So Boris Johnson has officially now resigned as a Member of Parliament. It follows a very fiery afternoon, a very fiery couple of days between Boris, the former Prime Minister, and Rishi Sunak, the current. So this is a statement that Boris Johnson issued, OK? Said Rishi Sunak is talking rubbish. To honour these peerages is not necessary to overrule Holac. Just a bit of an update here on what he's actually talking about. Rishi Sunak said that Boris Johnson's honours list, some of the people that Boris Johnson wanted to put in that honours list, Rishi Sunak wasn't comfortable with it and wasn't comfortable with what Boris was asking him to do. So Boris saying that's absolute rubbish, and that is a quote, it's rubbish, simply to ask them to renew their vetting, which was a mere formality. This includes people like Nadine Dorries, resigned, Alok Sharma, Nigel Adams, who has also resigned now, as far as we're getting here anyway. They were not given place in the House of Lords that Boris Johnson did nominate them for. What Rishi Sunak is saying was that Boris was essentially asking him to try to circumvent some procedure. Boris is saying that's absolute rubbish. Well, now that breaking news is that Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister, elected with an 80-odd seat majority not so long ago, has now stood down as an MP, and there will be a by-election in his seat. What you heard moments ago on this very show was Nigel Farage leaving the door open for Boris Johnson. What could happen now is that Rishi Sunak wins the war. I mean, he's the man in power, he's the man in Downing Street, he has all the resources at his disposal, and there is a sense, like it or not, there is a sense from a lot of people that the Conservative Party need to just draw a line under Boris Johnson and move on. That, I suspect, will be a mistake, especially in the red wall areas, but there is a sense that that is what the Conservative Party need to do in order to move on. And so, what would happen next with Boris Johnson? Maybe after this resignation, you will see him join another political party, maybe even team up with our very own here, Nigel Farage. But yes, Boris Johnson did say on Friday evening that he was quitting as a Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. He's made that official now. He has made that official. So there will be a by-election there. It's worthwhile noting that Nigel Adams, who was the Tory MP for Selby in North Yorkshire, has also officially resigned. So this is all just coming through to us right now. It is, a pretty fiery moment in the Conservative Party. There is talk of there being kind of an all-out civil war. It will be interesting to see if other people join Nadine Dorries, Nigel Adams and Boris Johnson in resigning and in quitting and enforcing by-elections, and what that will mean going forward. But I'm just going to delve into the inbox now because I want your reaction to this breaking news. GBviews at GBnews.com. Patrick, I didn't vote for Boris Johnson or anyone else. I haven't voted for a long time, but Boris Johnson would have my vote if he teamed up with Nigel Farage. And that is from Darren. Well, Nigel was on just a moment ago and he was saying just that. That's the big breaking news, that Boris Johnson has officially resigned. And I certainly do hope I might be able to have somebody to talk to me about that very, very shortly. There's loads more to come between now and 6 o'clock. Thousands of Albanians have crossed the channel on small boats, but now a landmark report says that they are fleeing a safe country. And we're going to cross live to Manchester, where tens of thousands of Manchester City fans are celebrating their club's historic treble. And yes, like I said, I will have more on that breaking news that Boris Johnson has officially resigned as an MP. Now, though, it's your headlines with Polly.
Patrick Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour, as you've been hearing, Boris Johnson has accused Rishi Sunak of talking rubbish after the Prime Minister said his predecessor asked him to overrule the vetting committee for his House of Lords nominations. The former Prime Minister is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs and key allies failing to appear on his resignation honours list, despite being nominated. Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma and Nigel Adams are among the MPs whose names were absent. Downing Street has defended the investigation into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties. That's after Mr Johnson attacked the Privileges Committee, describing it as a kangaroo court, before announcing his resignation as an MP. The inquiry is thought to have ruled the former Prime Minister lied to Parliament when he said COVID rules were followed. The final report will be published later. And more than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday. That's the highest number on a single day so far this year. And it means the total number of people making the crossing so far has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. And it's reported Scotland's First Minister will not suspend Nicola Sturgeon from the SNP following her arrest. Humza Yousaf has come under increasing pressure to suspend the former First Minister after she was questioned by police investigating the party's finances. She was released without charge pending further investigation and insists she's innocent of any wrongdoing. An 11-year-old British girl shot dead in France has been named as Solène Thornton. A neighbour is said to have shot at her and her family in the garden of their family home in Brittany. Her parents, Adrian and Rachel, were also injured in the attack, and her 8-year-old sister managed to escape to get help. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. More on all of those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound will buy you $1.2496 and €1.1627. The price of gold is £1,565 and 15 pence an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed the day today at 7,570 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
OK, I just want to reiterate the news that broke just before we went to the news there, which is that Boris Johnson has officially resigned as a Member of Parliament. There were rumours, of course, that he was actually going to officially do it, and now that has actually happened. Boris Johnson will not be a Conservative Member of Parliament, and it is causing rather a lot of controversy, certainly in the inbox at the moment. That is the breaking news, that Boris Johnson has officially quit as an MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. It comes on an explosive day where he has also issued a strong rebuttal to Rishi Sunak. So open warfare now between the two individuals there, the former Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak said that Boris Johnson asked him to do something that I wasn't prepared to do, which was to either overrule the House of Lords Appointments Committee or make promises to people. This is on the resignation honours list. And Boris Johnson asked him to do things that he wasn't comfortable with. Boris Johnson has come out and said that is absolute rubbish, and that actually, he says Rishi Sunak is talking rubbish. To honour these peerages, it was not necessary to overrule anything, but simply to ask them to renew their vetting, which was a mere formality. And those people involved, his political allies, Nadine Dorries, Alok Sharma, Nigel Adams. Nigel Adams also has just officially resigned as well. Nadine Dorries, of course, as well. So there we go. The appointments were blocked by the House of Lords Appointment Commission, apparently, which confirmed that it had taken 8 people off Boris Johnson's list. So Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, won a massive majority at the last election, was there, of course, through coronavirus, got Brexit done, whatever that really means, and now is no longer even a Member of Parliament. What do you want next for Boris Johnson? Do you think he should leave the Conservative Party? Do you think he should join a different party? Do you want to see him stand again somewhere else? Nigel Farage on this very show left the door wide open for him. But also, as well, do you think that Boris Johnson maybe should just go away and make millions and do something else entirely from politics? GB Views at gbnews.com. Get your views coming in on that. But now to a landmark report that blows away claims that Albanians arriving in the UK on small boats should be given asylum. A cross-party committee has found that Albania is a safe country and there is little evidence that Albanians are at risk there. The number of Albanians crossing the UK this year has plummeted, but in the 12 months up to last September, more than 12,000 Albanians had arrived on small boats. One of the MPs on the committee which produced the report is the Conservative Deputy Chairman, Lee Anderson. He told me that the Albanians who arrive on small boats are economic migrants, not genuine asylum seekers.
Shame and a pity and a waste of taxpayers' money and parliamentary time that we've had to go through this investigation and this report to tell us all what we already know. Anybody, Patrick, with an ounce of common sense knows that Albania is a safe country. They're economic migrants coming over, and the reason they're coming over on a boat is because it's quicker and cheaper than coming by the correct means. And once they get here, they can abuse the asylum system, and many of them can just disappear into the black economy for a life of crime and criminality, and then once again take advantage of this great country of ours. It really winds me up, it sticks in my throat that we've had to go through this on the Home Affairs Select Committee. Like I say, anybody with any common sense knows that they are economic migrants abusing our system.
OK, so that was Lee Anderson there. Now, he also held the Albanian ambassador's feet to the fire when he asked them a pretty straightforward question, which is, why don't they just get a flight for £28 on Wizz Air or whatever airline it is from Albania to the UK and then claim asylum when they get here? Lee Anderson suggested that that might be because they wouldn't want the authorities necessarily knowing exactly who they were or if they had a criminal record, etc., etc., and so that could be a problem. But when it comes to this now, that Albania is a, quote, safe country, and there is no real need to be accepting anybody from Albania, but nevertheless, we've been having people in hotels at the taxpayers' expense for the last couple of years. I want to know what can happen now, what will happen now. Joining me is immigration lawyer Harjab Singh Bangal, a fan favourite. Harjab, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So, what happens now as a result of this particular committee review? Does it mean that if anyone has got nationality Albanian on their asylum application, that really they're going to be on the next plane home?
No, not really. What it means is that Parliament has sat, or committee has sat in Parliament, and it's done a report, one of many reports by different organisations. This one says that Albania is a safe country. Some say that there are some problems in Albania, but it's safer than other countries. Some say it's not a safe country. So this will just be another report that, in this one in specific, the government will use in its cases against in refusing claims, asylum claims.
To be fair,
but once again, we've seen it's not much of a deterrent, really.
Well, no, but I mean, so it's a cross-party committee, which is quite important, actually. It includes people from,
that is important.
From all parties. It's not just with respect. It's not just people like Lee Anderson saying, this is I want to control our borders. And so I think that does have weight. It involved a visit to Albania. But if you also just look at the fact that, you can go... I mean, I've got friends who are on holiday in Albania now. It's not... You wouldn't really describe it as a country where you would necessarily need to seek asylum from, I would have thought. And so, is there any way now, any way whatsoever, that this report can be used either to get rid of the Albanians quicker or to maybe look at something that's coming down the track, which is an increased level in Indian migration, another safe country, and whether or not we can use it to create some different new legislation?
I don't think it's going to really help to make legislation. What this means is this report will be used by Home Office barristers in their case when they argue before a judge. So it might be harder for immigration lawyers arguing for Albanians to say, well, hold on, you haven't got any reports to say Albania is a safe country. So this can be technically used in evidence. In relation to stopping crossings and stopping small boats, you've seen that this weekend we had record numbers, right? 616. So it's obviously not stopping that. That's the job of the Border Force and the international police and intelligence agencies to catch the gangs, to stop it. And the gangs don't seem to be deterred by any of this, Patrick. You know and I know we often talk about stop the gangs, but it doesn't really something the government is not really interested in or seems to have very little luck with. In relation to returns, we do have a returns agreement with Albania, but for some reason our returns have fallen from 60,000 in 2010, and that was under a government which a lot of people branded as immigration friendly. and we're opening the doors to 3,000 last year.
Yeah.
So you tell me which government is anti-immigration and which pro-immigration. Why have deportations gone down? Now, 50,000 people coming a year isn't a problem if you're sending 60,000 back, Patrick.
Yeah.
But the problem is 60,000 people coming a year is a problem when you're sending 3,000 back. And even before Brexit, the figures were only at 5,000. So we've got to question the will of this government and the effectiveness of the Home Office to send people back.
And in light of what we've been reporting about, frankly, all day, Harjap, as well, which is Rishi Sunak last week standing up saying, I'm stopping the boats and it's all working. And then, surprise, surprise, the wind direction changes and the weather clears a bit and we have a record day for this year on a Sunday. I mean, anyone could have seen that coming. And so, again, like you said there, you are absolutely spot on to question the will of Rishi Sunak to want to actually stop this, because we would have to speed up processing. It's all very well and good saying, right, we think Albania is a safe country. We think, you know, we want to have a returns agreement. We have got a returns agreement with them. But if you are not empowering people or employing people to sit there and process these people quicker, then it's not going to happen, is it? But Harjap, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much. As ever, I'll chat to you again soon. Harjap Singh Bangal there, immigration lawyer. Just going to delve into the inbox quickly on this, because there's lots of reaction coming into the breaking news that dropped just a few moments ago, which is that Boris Johnson has now officially resigned as an MP, as Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and indeed you know it's official because he's taken it out of his Twitter bio, which I'm looking at now. It just says former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Just a couple of emails quickly on this. Patrick, it would be so good if Boris Johnson teamed up with Nigel Farage and they joined together and that they created a party themselves. Patrick, I think Boris should get together with Reform, etc., etc., etc. Lots of this coming in right now. That is the breaking news, that Boris Johnson has indeed resigned as a Member of Parliament. GB Views at GBNews.com. But now to a story that is incredibly painful to me to discuss. Manchester City made history on Saturday, and tonight they're celebrating their remarkable treble with their fans. Yay. I'm Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
OK, I'm going to keep this very quick, mainly because I am a Manchester United fan, but Manchester City fans are getting ready for the mother of all parties. In less than an hour, Pep Guardiola and his players will travel on an open-top bus through Manchester after they completed a historic treble of the Champions League, the Premier League and the FA Cup, years after Manchester United did the same. GB News' North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper is in Manchester City Centre for us now. Any sign of Jack Grealish, or has he gone missing in Ibiza?
We haven't seen him just yet, Patrick. Sorry to disappoint you. You know, the atmosphere is building, the music is pumping. You can see those parade buses just behind me here. We're on the route where thousands of Man City fans are already lining the streets, hoping to get a glimpse of, as you say, that team who've finally been able to do that historic treble. Now, hasn't been the easiest time over the last few years for Man City fans, but they've stuck with them regardless. Joining me now is two of those fans. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
What does it mean to you to see Man City finally do that treble?
Everything. It was just amazing. It was touch and go, but I had every confidence that they're going to do it.
Do you think it's Pep who's made the difference?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, 100%.
And what does the future hold for Man City? You've done the treble now. What more is there?
Well, to beat Madrid with the 13 Champions League trophies, trying to overtake them, yeah.
Is that something you think is on the cards?
Of course it is, yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Do you mind me asking how long you've been a Man City fan for?
70s.
Since they said so?
Yeah.
So quite some time, but you've stuck with them the whole way?
Yes, through thick and thin.
Always. Thank you so much, guys. For these Man City fans today, it's all about celebration. It's been a long time coming, I'm sure they would say, but they've finally done it. They've finally got that elusive treble.
All right, Sophie, thank you very, very much. Sophie Reaper there is in Manchester City Centre for us, as those City fans will indeed party along into the night. Right, let's get more now on the breaking news that Boris Johnson has officially resigned as an MP. He said on Friday evening that he was quitting as the Member of Parliament for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. That's the breaking news. Boris Johnson has confirmed that he has quit. Joining me now to discuss this is political commentator Emma Webb. Emma, thank you very, very much. What's your initial reaction to this Boris Johnson, not so long ago, Prime Minister, now not even an MP?
Rishi Sunak must be banging his head on the desk. This is an absolute nightmare for the Conservative Party. The pollster, Professor John Curtis, has already said that this is going to be an electoral nightmare for the Conservative parties, fighting 3 by-elections at the same time. I think Rishi Sunak has potentially created a headache for himself. Boris Johnson has said earlier today that Rishi Sunak was talking rubbish when he said that Boris had asked him to overrule the appointments committee. Stating that it was only simply a formality asking him to review the vetting for those appointments. So I think that Rishi has shown himself really to be a bit cat-handed in handling the politics of this. And now after we've seen what's happened in Scotland with the SNP as well, and the potential for Labour to gain a huge number of seats up in Scotland, we were expecting that there was a potential in the next general election for a hung parliament, and now we're possibly looking at a Labour majority. So Rishi is really going to have to get his act together.
Well, he is. I mean, Nadine Dorries has got a majority of something like 24,000. The latest opinion polling appeared to suggest that Boris Johnson would have hung on to his seat there. So if those two go, that's maybe more of a comment on Rishi than anything else. Just very quickly, Emma, sorry, we're pressed for time. Should Boris Johnson team up with Nigel Farage?
It would be very interesting. I think Lawrence Fox has chosen one of GB News' own also, as well as Nigel Farage, has chosen to run in Boris's old seat. So anything could happen.
Anything can happen. Look, Emma, thank you for coming up at very short notice as well, just to react to that breaking news that Boris has officially resigned. Thank you. Emma Webb there, political commentator. Make sure that you check out Emma as well, as she occasionally fills in for Calvin Robinson at the weekends. Always a good watch. Look, thank you very much, everybody who's been watching and listening in. Make sure you watch the show back if there are bits that you missed, including that box office exclusive with Nigel Farage, who has left the door open for Boris Johnson. Up next, it's Jubes & Co.
Afternoon, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Very warm and humid still out there, and thunderstorms breaking out again. By no means everywhere seeing them, but where they are occurring, they're causing a few problems, dropping a lot of rain in a short space of time. High pressure dominating, but way up to the north. Actually, across the UK, not a lot of isobars, which means the winds are pretty light, which means where we're seeing their storms, they're quite slow moving. So parts of England and Wales, but also parts of Northern Ireland and Western and Northern Scotland, seeing a few thundery downpours. A lot of spray surface water on the roads where they're occurring, but they'll tend to fade through this evening and most will have a dry night. It's quite warm and humid again, but in the east, slightly cooler compared to last night. As we go through Tuesday, most will stay dry, fine and sunny. Could start a little misty, and there may still be one or two overnight showers kicking around. And as we go through the day, Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, particularly, again, the western side, may well develop some further afternoon downpours and thunderstorms. We have another Met Office yellow warning in place here. Some coasts may stay a little misty and murky, particularly around Shetland, but for most it's going to be a sunny day tomorrow. Lots of very warm, humid sunshine, temperatures in the south getting up to 29, maybe 30 Celsius. Cooler on some coasts. UV levels will be high, and still a potential for high amounts of rain from these thunderstorms in the northwest during the evening. But again, they should fade. Most places looking dry as we go into Wednesday, and indeed for much of the rest of this week. Again, it'll stay quite warm and humid, but just notice this easterly breeze picking back up. Not as strong as it was a couple of weeks ago, but it will bring slightly cooler conditions in as we go through the rest of the week. Again, some coasts will be a little misty and murky, but look at this. Most places on Wednesday, fine, sunny and very warm, just not quite as hot as it will be through Tuesday afternoon, with temperatures in the high 20s.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.